Close your eyes and imagine standing in the ancient training halls of Korriban. Stone walls, worn smooth by millennia of dark side energy, rise into shadows that no torch can fully illuminate. The air itself feels heavy, charged with malevolent power. In the center of this chamber, two figures circle each other, crimson blades humming with barely contained fury. This is not the measured, contemplative combat of the Jedi. This is something else entirely, something primal, something deadly. The lightsaber, that elegant weapon for a more civilized age, becomes something altogether different in the hands of a Sith. Where a Jedi seeks harmony with the Force, channeling it through careful discipline and emotional restraint, a Sith tears at the Force, ripping power from the very fabric of reality through passion, rage, and overwhelming will. This fundamental difference in philosophy manifests in every aspect of combat. Every strike carries not just physical force, but emotional weight. Every parry is powered not by serene focus, but by burning desire for dominance. The relationship between a Sith and their lightsaber transcends the Jedi concept of the weapon as an extension of oneself. For the Sith, the blade becomes an instrument of will made manifest. When Darth Sidious ignited his crimson blade, he wasn't simply activating a weapon, he was releasing a physical embodiment of decades of calculated malice and carefully cultivated hatred. When Darth Vader raised his lightsaber, the blade didn't just cut through matter. It channeled the anguish of a man trapped in a prison of his own making, powered by a rage that had burned for over 2 decades. Understanding Sith lightsaber combat requires understanding this fundamental truth about the dark side itself. The Force, as Jedi understand it, flows through all living things, binding the galaxy together in an interconnected web of energy. The Jedi seek to move with this flow, to align themselves with the will of the Force. But the Sith reject this passive acceptance. They view the Force as a tool to be seized, bent, and dominated. Their combat philosophy reflects this approach. Where Jedi forms evolved to protect, to defend, to preserve life wherever possible, Sith combat techniques developed with singular purpose, to destroy utterly and completely. This divergence in philosophy created fascinating parallels and contradictions. The 7 classical forms of lightsaber combat were, after all, developed by the Jedi Order. Yet Sith Lords throughout history have proven themselves among the greatest masters of these very forms. How could this be? The answer lies in the nature of the dark side itself. Emotion, the Sith discovered, could be a crucible that forged skill beyond what disciplined study alone could achieve. A Sith apprentice, driven by hunger for power and fear of death at their master's hands, might practice a single form with obsessive intensity that few Jedi could match. It's more than that. The Sith approached lightsaber combat with a pragmatism that the Jedi often lacked. The Jedi Code spoke of peace, of avoiding conflict when possible. Many Jedi forms reflected this defensive philosophy. But the Sith had no such compunctions. They studied forms not for philosophical alignment, but for effectiveness. If a technique worked, if it granted victory, then morality was irrelevant. This ruthless efficiency led to innovations the Jedi would never contemplate. Double-bladed lightsabers, Curved hilts designed purely for killing efficiency, combat techniques that incorporated deception and psychological warfare. The history of the lightsaber combat is written in blood across thousands of years, from the earliest Dark Jedi who would become the first Sith Lords on Korriban, to Darth Bane who reformed the Sith through his rule of two, to the ultimate culmination of the Sith Grand Plan under Darth Sidious. Each generation added to the dark legacy. They refined techniques. They discovered weaknesses in Jedi forms and exploited them mercilessly. They turned the Jedi's own combat philosophies against them. Consider the simple act of how a Sith holds their lightsaber. The grip, the stance, the weight distribution, all of these technical elements become infused with dark side energy. A Sith in combat stance doesn't simply prepare to fight. They project menace. They radiate threat. The Force itself seems to darken around them, as if reality recoils from the concentrated malevolence they embody. This psychological component of Sith combat cannot be overlooked. Before the first blade even clashed, a Sith aimed to dominate their opponent's mind. The Sith understood something the Jedi often overlooked. Combat, true combat, where life hangs in the balance, cannot be fully simulated in safe training. The body's response to genuine mortal danger differs fundamentally from practice scenarios. Adrenaline sharpens senses. Time seems to slow. The Force flows differently when death stands at one's shoulder. So the Sith simply eliminated the gap between training and reality. Every training session became a life or death struggle. Apprentices who survived learned not just techniques, but how to function in the heightened state of awareness that comes with genuine combat. This philosophy extended to the selection and construction of lightsabers themselves. Jedi traveled to crystal caves, meditating until the Force guided them to a kyber crystal that called to them. The process was spiritual, contemplative, a union between Jedi and crystal. Sith took a different approach. They obtained crystals however they could, stealing them from fallen Jedi, synthesizing them through alchemical processes, or in some cases, corrupting existing crystals through dark side rituals. The act of making a crystal bleed, forcing it to resonate with dark side energy until it glowed crimson, became a rite of passage for Sith apprentices. The crimson blade itself carried psychological weight in combat. For thousands of years, that specific color meant one thing: Sith. When a red lightsaber ignited in the darkness, it announced not just the presence of an opponent, but the philosophy they embodied. Jedi facing that crimson glow knew they fought not merely a skilled duelist, but someone who had embraced the dark side completely. Someone who would show no mercy, respect no surrender, and fight with the full power of rage, and Hotet channeling through every strike. Throughout this exploration of Sith lightsaber combat, we'll examine how different Sith Lords approach the seven classical forms. We'll see how Darth Tyrannus Count Dooku transformed Form II into an art of aristocratic lethality. We'll witness how Darth Vader adapted Form 5 after his transformation, turning physical limitation into devastating advantage. We'll explore the terrifying efficiency of Darth Maul's aggressive Form 7 implementation And we'll discover techniques beyond the classical forms, forbidden methods that even some Sith considered too dangerous or dishonorable. But more than cataloging techniques, we'll uncover what Sith combat philosophy reveals about the dark side itself. Every form tells a story. Every master's adaptation speaks to their personality, their strengths, their ultimate fate. In the clash of crimson blades, in the precise footwork of ancient forms, in the brutal efficiency of Sith dueling, we find truths about power, ambition, and the seductive call of the dark side. The lightsaber, in the end, is more than a weapon. For the Sith, it becomes a philosophy made tangible. Every ignition is a declaration. Every strike is a statement of will. Every victory is proof that the dark side grants power to those bold enough to seize it. The story of Sith lightsaber combat is the story of the Sith themselves. Ruthless, efficient, and eternally hungry for dominance. So let us begin our journey through the dark side of blade work. Let us explore the forms that have shaped galactic history. Let us examine the masters whose names still echo through the Force as warnings and legends. And let us understand that in studying Sith combat, we study the dark side's fundamental nature: power through passion, strength through conflict, victory through any means necessary. The crimson blades await. The lessons are written in blood across millennia, and the dark side of lightsaber combat beckons those brave or foolish enough to learn its secrets. Form 1. Shicho, the foundation of all combat. Every master, whether servant of light or shadow, begins with fundamentals. Form 1, known as Shicho, or the Way of the Sarlacc, represents the bedrock upon which all other lightsaber combat stands. Developed during the Jedi Order's transition from ancient metal swords to lightsabers, this form established the basic movements, target zones, and combat philosophy that would influence every subsequent style. For the Sith, mastery of Shicho became both a necessity and an opportunity, a foundation to build upon, and ultimately to subvert toward darker purposes. The origins of Shicho stretch back thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin, to an era when lightsabers first became the standard weapon of Force users. The Jedi and early Jedi had needed a combat system that could accommodate the unique properties of these new weapons. Unlike traditional metal blades, lightsabers possessed virtually no weight in the blade itself, concentrating all mass in the hilt. The blade could cut through nearly anything with minimal resistance, yet two lightsaber blades meeting would create a solid lock through their electromagnetic fields. These unusual properties demanded combat techniques specifically designed for lightsaber use. Shicho addressed these challenges by establishing fundamental principles that every Force user needed to understand. The form taught practitioners to treat the lightsaber as an extension of their body, moving it through basic patterns that covered all primary attack angles and defensive positions. Wide, sweeping strikes became the hallmark of Form 1, movements designed to generate momentum and maintain continuous blade motion that could ward off multiple opponents simultaneously. For the Jedi, Shicho represented the first step in a youngling's training, a form to be learned and then built upon with more specialized techniques. But for the Sith, this fundamental form took on additional significance. Dark side practitioners recognized that Shi'i Cho's apparent simplicity masked profound effectiveness when executed with sufficient skill and power. A Sith master of Form 1 didn't simply know the movements. They infused every strike with dark side energy, turning basic techniques into devastating attacks. The philosophy underlying Shi'i Cho emphasized determination and resilience, hence its alternate name, the determination form. Practitioners learn to maintain offensive pressure through constant motion, never allowing an opponent moment to counterattack. The form's targeting philosophy divided the body into specific zones: the head, arms, legs, and torso, teaching students to strike at these primary areas with deliberate intent. In the hands of a Sith, these target zones became killing fields, each successful strike aimed not to disarm, but to destroy. When the Dark Jedi fled the Republic after the 100-Year Darkness, eventually discovering the Sith species on Korriban, they brought with them knowledge of Shi'i Cho, among other Jedi combat techniques. These fallen Jedi, who would become the first Sith Lords, adapted Form 1 to serve their new philosophy, where Jedi taught Shi'i Cho with emphasis on controlled aggression and the potential for disarmament. Sith instruction focused purely on offensive dominance. Every training session became an exercise in overwhelming opposition through relentless assault. The Sith recognized a key advantage in Shi'i Cho that many Jedi overlooked: its effectiveness against multiple opponents. The form's wide sweeping strikes and emphasis on maintaining blade motion made it ideal for engaging several enemies simultaneously. A skilled Sith practitioner could hold off numerous attackers, keeping them at bay through the psychological impact of constantly moving blade and the genuine threat of being caught by a strike. This tactical application proved invaluable during the ancient conflicts between Sith and Jedi, where battles often involved chaotic melees rather than formal duels. Throughout Sith history, various masters demonstrated that Shi'i Cho should never be dismissed as merely a beginner's form. The ancient Sith lords who first established the empire on Korriban built their martial traditions on Form 1's foundation. They developed training regimens that pushed apprentices to master every basic technique until reflexes became instantaneous. A Sith who had truly mastered Shi'i Cho could fall back on these fundamentals in any situation, knowing that proper execution of basic principles would always be effective. The form's emphasis on disarmament took on particularly sinister implications in Sith hands. While Jedi viewed removing an opponent's weapon as a way to end conflict without unnecessary killing, Sith saw disarmament as psychological warfare. Imagine the terror of a Jedi who has just lost their lightsaber to a Sith's Shicho maneuver, watching their weapon fly away, knowing they'd now face a dark side warrior completely unarmed. In these moments, the Sith didn't simply defeat an opponent. They demonstrated absolute superiority before delivering the killing blow. The physicality required for proper Shi'i Cho execution suited Sith training philosophy perfectly. The form demanded strength, stamina, and the ability to maintain aggressive pressure over extended periods. These weren't gentle, flowing movements, but powerful strikes that required full body commitment. For Sith apprentices, building physical conditioning alongside force powers, Shicho training session became endurance tests that separated those with genuine potential from those who would fall to lesser Sith or perish in actual combat. Sith adaptation of Shicho also emphasized the psychological component often overlooked in Jedi instruction. Form I's relentless, seemingly chaotic barrage of strikes could overwhelm an opponent mentally as well as physically. A Sith advancing with Shicho techniques projected an aura of inexorable aggression. Each strike flowed into the next in. One notable aspect of Sith Shicho training involved learning to channel rage and hatred through the form's basic movements. Dark side energy could amplify the power behind each strike, turning what might be merely a strong blow from a Jedi into a devastating attack capable of breaking through defenses entirely. This infusion of emotion into technique became a defining characteristic of how Sith approached all combat forms. They didn't simply learn movements, they made those movements conduits for dark side power. The training methodology for Shi'icho among the Sith diverged significantly from Jedi approaches. Where Jedi academies emphasized patience and gradual progression through the form's techniques, Sith instruction pushed students to their breaking points and beyond. Masters would attack apprentices without warning during training, forcing them to apply Shi'icho principles under genuine threat. Every training bout became real combat, with the constant possibility that failure might mean death or severe injury. This brutal training approach produced results, however. Sith who survived Form I instruction possessed reflexes honed by actual danger and skill forged in genuine combat pressure. They didn't simply know Shi'icho in theory. They had internalized its principles at a level where conscious thought became unnecessary. In the moment of engagement, their bodies would respond automatically with proper technique, guided by muscle memory, developed through hundreds of training sessions, where mistakes meant pain. The versatility of Form I made it especially valuable for Sith operating independently or in small numbers. Unlike more specialized forms that excelled in specific situations, Shi'icho provided effective techniques for nearly any combat scenario. Whether facing a single skilled opponent, multiple weaker enemies, or even non-lightsaber threats, a Sith master of Form I could adapt their approach while maintaining the form's core principles. This adaptability ensured that even as Sith learned more advanced forms, Shi'icho remained a reliable foundation to return to when situations became chaotic. Historical records from Sith academies on Korriban revealed the central place Form I held in their curriculum. Every aspirant began with Shi'icho, learning its techniques before being permitted to advance to other forms. But unlike Jedi academies, where younglings might spend only months on Form I basics before diversifying their training, Sith academies required years of dedicated Shi'icho practice. Masters understood that without absolute mastery of fundamentals, advanced techniques would lack the solid foundation needed for true excellence. The form's emphasis on multiple opponent engagement proved particularly valuable during the ancient wars between Sith and Jedi. In the chaos of battlefield combat, where formations broke down and fighting became desperate melees, Shicho techniques allowed Sith warriors to hold positions against superior numbers. The psychological impact of a single Sith, blade whirling in constant motion, holding off multiple Jedi, couldn't be overstated. It demonstrated not just skill, but the power the dark side could grant to those who embraced it fully. Certain Sith, throughout history, became known for their unexpected mastery of Form I despite its reputation as a basic form. These practitioners understood that any technique executed with sufficient skill and power could be devastatingly effective. They demonstrated that the limitation wasn't in Shiicho itself, but in how most practitioners approached it. By infusing Form I with dark side energy and executing its techniques with absolute precision, these Sith masters turned a foundational form into a weapon of terrible efficiency. The enduring legacy of Sith approaches to Shiicho can be seen in how later generations viewed the form. Even as more specialized and sophisticated forms developed, serious Sith practitioners never abandoned Form I training entirely. They recognized that combat, especially life or death engagement, often stripped away complexity and reduced encounters to fundamental exchanges of attack and defense. In these moments, the practitioner who had truly mastered basics held the advantage. Form I also served another purpose within Sith training philosophy. It taught patience and discipline even while channeling rage. A practitioner of Shiicho learned to maintain constant pressure without exhausting themselves, to strike with power while conserving energy for extended combat, and to read opponents while maintaining their own offensive momentum. These lessons in controlled aggression became fundamental to understanding how to properly channel the dark side in combat. The way of the Sarlacc taught determination. The Sith learned that lesson well, then transformed it into something darker. The determination not just to survive, but to dominate utterly. Form II Makashi, the duelist's elegant death. In the annals of lightsaber combat, no form better exemplifies the transformation of martial technique into deadly art than Form II, known as Makashi. Called the contention form or the way of the Isalamiri. This sophisticated style emerged from necessity during an era when lightsaber duels between Force users became commonplace. Where Shiicho addressed combat fundamentals, Makashi refined these basics into something altogether more lethal, a form designed purely for the singular purpose of defeating another lightsaber wielder with maximum efficiency, and, for certain practitioners, a disturbing elegance. The development of Form II represents a pivotal moment in lightsaber combat evolution. As dark Jedi and Sith Lords proliferated across the galaxy, the Jedi Order faced opponents who were their equals in force sensitivity and increasingly skilled with lightsabers. Shicho's wide, powerful strikes, developed for combating multiple opponents or those armed with conventional weapons, proved inadequate against the precision and speed of another Force user. The need arose for techniques specifically designed for lightsaber against lightsaber combat, where every fraction of a second mattered and the slightest mistake could prove fatal. Makashi answered this need with an approach that prioritized economy of motion, surgical precision, and complete control. The form's philosophy centered on the idea that lightsaber combat between skilled Force users was fundamentally different from any other type of sword fighting. The weightless blade, the omnidirectional cutting edge, the ability to parry without concern for blade strength, these unique properties demanded techniques that would seem impractical with traditional weapons, but became devastatingly effective with lightsabers. For the Sith, Form II became something more than merely another combat style to master. It became an expression of aristocratic refinement, of superiority demonstrated through flawless technique. Many Sith lords throughout history were drawn to Makashi because it allowed them to showcase not just power, but control. A Sith master of Form II didn't simply defeat opponents, they dismantled them with deliberate precision, making the vast gulf in skill painfully obvious before delivering the final strike. The technical elements of Makashi distinguished it immediately from Form I, where Shicho emphasized full-body movements and sweeping strikes. Makashi practitioners employed minimal motion. Footwork became intricate and deliberate, with duelists maintaining perfect balance while constantly adjusting position through small, precise steps. The blade moved in tight, controlled arcs, each strike calculated to exploit specific weaknesses in an opponent's defense. Parries deflected incoming attacks with minimal energy expenditure, redirecting force rather than meeting it head-on. One-handed grip became the standard for Form II practitioners, freeing the offhand for gestures that could integrate force powers into combat or simply enhance balance during complex footwork. This single-handed approach allowed for extended reach and greater flexibility in blade positioning. A Makashi duelist could present their blade at angles impossible to achieve with two-handed grips, creating openings and defensive lines that confused opponents trained in other forms. The development and adoption of curved hilt lightsabers became closely associated with Form II masters. These specialized weapons, with their distinctive bend in the hilt, provided enhanced control for Makashi's precise movements. The curve allowed for more natural wrist positioning during the form's characteristic thrusts and controlled cuts. It also granted slight advantages in blade manipulation during locks and disengagements. Minor edge that proved critical in duels between masters, where victory might hinge on millisecond advantages. Throughout Sith history, one name became synonymous with Form II mastery: Count Dooku, who took the Sith name Darth Tyrannus. Dooku's approach to Makashi represented the culmination of centuries of refinement. As a Jedi Master before his fall, he had studied Form II extensively, recognizing its superiority in single combat. After embracing the dark side, he transformed his already considerable skill into something terrible and beautiful, a fighting style that embodied cold, calculated lethality, cloaked in aristocratic refinement. The Count's dueling record spoke to Form II's effectiveness in the hands of a true master. Against Obi-Wan Kenobi on Geonosis, Dooku's Makashi cut through the Jedi's Soresu defense with contemptuous ease. Against Anakin Skywalker, in that same encounter, he defeated a skilled Form V practitioner despite the young Jedi's raw power and aggression. These victories weren't flukes or luck. they demonstrated fundamental advantages that Makashi provided when executed at the highest level. Dooku's technique exemplified Form II's core philosophy, control through superior skill. He maintained perfect measure, keeping precise distance that allowed his blade to threaten his opponent while staying just beyond their reach. His economy of motion was absolute. Every movement served a specific tactical purpose. He avoided unnecessary flourishes, preferring precise cuts to specific target areas. His blade work resembled fencing more than sword fighting, with emphasis on thrusts, feints, and blade manipulations designed to create openings for decisive strikes. The psychological component of Dooku's Makashi cannot be overlooked. He combined the form's technical precision with the Sith technique of Dun Mok, using taunts and psychological warfare to erode opponents' confidence. Against Anakin, he spoke calmly during their duels, pointing out the young Jedi's inadequacies and questioning his skills. This combination of flawless technique and mental assault created pressure from multiple directions. Opponents had to defend against both physical attacks and psychological undermining simultaneously. Form II's weaknesses, however, were as pronounced as its strengths. Makashi's laser focus on single opponent combat left practitioners vulnerable to blaster fire and multiple attackers. The form included limited techniques for deflecting ranged attacks, as it was designed for an era when most combat between Force users involved lightsaber duels rather than firefights. A Makashi master caught in a crossfire or surrounded by multiple opponents faced serious disadvantage. This vulnerability proved fatal for many Sith practitioners throughout history. Makashi's effectiveness decreased dramatically when circumstances forced its practitioners outside their ideal combat scenario. The form's emphasis on precision over power also created challenges against more aggressive styles. When facing an opponent who could bring overwhelming strength to bear, Makashi's controlled deflections might prove insufficient to prevent being simply battered through the defenses. Dooku's final duel with Anakin Skywalker aboard the Invisible Hand showcased both Form II's strengths and its critical weakness. The Sith Lord's Makashi initially allowed him to control the engagement, his precision and experience countering Skywalker's raw power. But when Anakin finally tapped into the dark side fully, channeling rage through Form V's devastating counterattacks, Dooku found himself overwhelmed. His elegant parries couldn't redirect the sheer force behind Skywalker's Djem So strikes. Makashi's greatest weakness, vulnerability to pure overwhelming power, became starkly apparent. Beyond Dooku, other Sith throughout history embraced Form II, Asajj Ventress, Dooku's assassin and failed apprentice, trained in Makashi, though her technique lacked her master's refinement. She compensated for this gap by wielding twin curved hilt lightsabers, using paired blades to cover weaknesses in her Form II execution. Her approach demonstrated how Sith adapted forms to their strengths, recognizing limitations and finding creative solutions rather than simply abandoning promising techniques. The Grand Inquisitor, during the reign of the Empire, also demonstrated proficiency in Form II. His spinning double-bladed lightsaber added an unconventional element to traditional Makashi technique. This adaptation showed how later Sith and Darkside practitioners continued to evolve forms, rather than treating them as fixed disciplines. The fundamental principles of Makashi, precision, control, economy of motion, could be applied even with non-traditional weapons. The decline of Form II's prominence after the fall of the Sith, following the Great Hyperspace War, reflects changing galactic circumstances. As lightsaber duels became less common and blaster technology proliferated, Makashi's advantages diminished. The form saw a resurgence during the new Sith Wars, when concentrated conflicts between Force users again made its dueling techniques relevant. But by the Clone Wars era, only a few practitioners maintained serious study of Form II, with Dooku standing as the preeminent master. This specialization reflected broader Sith philosophy. The Jedi trained to be guardians, requiring broad skills to address various threats. The Sith sought power through perfection in chosen areas. A Sith who mastered Makashi completely could be defeated by circumstances that played to the form's weaknesses, but in proper conditions, formal duel, single opponent, blade-to-blade combat, they became virtually unstoppable. The dueling culture that developed among certain Sith circles elevated Form II to near religious status. For these practitioners, the formal duel represented the ultimate test. Victory proved not just skill, but philosophical rightness. The winner didn't simply defeat an opponent, they demonstrated that their approach, their understanding, their power exceeded their rivals. This mindset transformed Makashi practice from mere combat training into something approaching spiritual exercise. Technical mastery of Form II required years, even decades, of dedicated practice. The precision demanded by its techniques couldn't be rushed. Footwork had to become absolutely instinctive, allowing practitioners to maintain perfect positioning without conscious thought. Blade control needed to reach the point where the lightsaber moved as naturally as their own hand, responding to intention rather than deliberate commands. Defensive technique had to account for every possible angle of attack, with appropriate parries becoming reflexive. The relationship between Form II and the curved hilt lightsaber deserves deeper examination. The weapon design wasn't merely aesthetic choice, but functional requirement for optimal Makashi execution. The curve allowed wrist movements that standard hilts couldn't accommodate as naturally. During the form's characteristic thrusts, the curve positioned the blade's angle perfectly, without requiring awkward wrist contortions. In blade locks, the curve provided leverage advantages during disengagement attempts. These seemingly minor benefits compounded across a duel, providing cumulative advantage to the skilled practitioner. Not every Makashi practitioner used curved hilts, however. Some Sith recognized that while the specialized weapon enhanced the form's execution, it also telegraphed their style. An opponent seeing the distinctive curved hilt immediately knew they faced a Form II practitioner, allowing them to adjust tactics accordingly. Some Sith therefore chose to master Makashi with standard hilts, trading optimal execution for tactical surprise. The philosophical alignment between Sith ideology and Makashi's principles created natural synergy. Form II emphasized dominance through superior skill, a perfect match for the Sith belief in strength as the ultimate arbiter of worth. The form's focus on defeating an individual opponent mirrored the Sith tradition of master and apprentice, where eventually one must defeat the other. Even Makashi's aristocratic aesthetic appealed to certain Sith who viewed themselves as rightful rulers, superior beings who deserved to stand above lesser individuals. This philosophical harmony doesn't mean Makashi was inherently a Sith form. Many Jedi throughout history achieved great skill in Form II, but the alignment between the form's principles and Sith psychology meant that dark side practitioners who studied Makashi often achieved a transcendent mastery. Their willingness to embrace the form's implicit message that you prove superiority through defeating your opponent in single combat aligned perfectly with their broader worldview. The decline of Makashi proficiency after the Clone Wars reflected both tactical evolution and the near extinction of Force users. As the Empire rose and the Jedi fell, lightsaber combat itself became increasingly rare. The few remaining Jedi focused on survival rather than refining dueling techniques. The Inquisitorius, trained to hunt surviving Jedi, employed forms better suited to their mission. Makashi, that ultimate dueling form, had diminishing relevance in a galaxy where formal lightsaber duels simply didn't occur. Yet the form's legacy endures. In any discussion of lightsaber combat mastery, Count Dooku's name arises inevitably. His Makashi represents a standard against which all later practitioners are measured. Videos of his duels, holographic records preserved in various archives, continue to be studied by those few who still practice lightsaber combat. The elegant, efficient, absolutely precise movements of Form II at its highest expression remain visually striking even to observers who don't fully understand the technical sophistication being displayed. This promise proved both true and limited. True, in that masters like Dooku demonstrated that flawless Makashi execution could defeat virtually any opponent in fair single combat. Limited, in that combat is rarely fair. Circumstances don't always favor the duelist, and overwhelming power or numbers can triumph over even perfect technique. The form's legacy is therefore one of brilliant but narrow focus, absolute mastery within defined parameters, but vulnerability outside those boundaries. As we continue examining Sith approaches to lightsaber combat, remember that Form II represents the apex of precision-based fighting. It shows that the Sith understood power came in many forms, not just rage and aggression, but also control and refinement. The crimson blade of Dooku's curved hilt lightsaber moving through Makashi's elegant patterns remains one of the most iconic images in Sith combat history. Beautiful, deadly efficient, and ultimately, like so many who walk the dark side, defeated not by superior skill, but by the consequences of its own limitations. Form 3, Sora Su, the Patient Shadow. At first glance, Form 3 appears an unlikely choice for Sith practitioners. Sora Su, the way of the Mynak, or the Resilience form, emphasized absolute defensive mastery and patient, methodical combat. Its philosophy centered on outlasting opponents weathering attacks until exhaustion or frustration created openings for counterattacks. For warriors who drew power from passion, rage, and aggressive dominance, this defensive, almost passive approach seemed antithetical to Sith nature. Yet, history reveals that certain Sith not only studied Soresu, but adapted its principles to serve the dark side in unexpected ways. Form 3 emerged during a critical shift in galactic warfare. As blaster technology proliferated and lightsaber duels between Force users became less common, the Jedi Order recognized their practitioners needed effective defense against ranged weapons. Soresu answered this need by developing the tightest, most efficient defensive technique in lightsaber combat. Practitioners learned to create an almost impenetrable shield of blade movement, deflecting incoming fire from multiple directions while advancing steadily toward opponents or maintaining defensive positions indefinitely. The core principle of Soresu involved minimal movement, achieving maximum defensive coverage. Practitioners positioned their blade to cover vital areas, making small, precise adjustments to intercept attacks rather than broad, sweeping movements. This economy of motion allowed Soresu masters to maintain their defense for extended periods without exhausting themselves. Against blaster fire, they could deflect shots for hours if necessary. Against other lightsaber users, they could parry endlessly, waiting for opponents to make mistakes born of frustration or fatigue. This defensive mastery came at a cost: limited offensive capability. Form 3 included few aggressive techniques, focusing almost entirely on defense and counterattacks. A Soresu practitioner rarely initiated attacks, preferring to wait for opponents to expose weaknesses. This passive approach aligned perfectly with Jedi philosophy about avoiding unnecessary conflict and preserving life. For Sith, however, such restraint seemed a weakness rather than strength. Yet, certain Sith recognized the strategic value in Soresu's principles. During the millennia, when Sith operated in hiding, surviving despite Jedi Order efforts to eliminate them, defensive mastery offered clear advantages. A Sith who could neutralize attacks, survive encounters with superior numbers, and wear down opponents through attrition lived to grow stronger. The Sith understanding of Soresu therefore differed fundamentally from Jedi application. They viewed it not as a primary combat form, but as a survival tool. The most notable Sith adaptation of Form 3 came from Darth Vader. After his transformation on Mustafar, the Dark Lord found his previous combat style untenable. The injuries he sustained and the life support armor he required limited his mobility severely. The acrobatic techniques he had favored as Anakin Skywalker became impossible. His decreased speed and flexibility left him vulnerable to quick opponents who could exploit his reduced agility. Vader needed to adapt or face eventual defeat by more mobile adversaries. His solution involved integrating Soresu principles into his established Form 5 foundation. Vader studied Form 3 intensely, recognizing that its tight defensive movements matched his current physical limitations perfectly. The form's emphasis on minimal motion suited his restricted movement. Its focus on positioning and efficiency over speed played to his remaining strengths. Most importantly, Soresu's principle of patient, methodical combat aligned with his evolved combat philosophy. This hybrid approach showcased sophisticated understanding of lightsaber combat principles. Vader recognized that forms weren't rigid systems, but collections of techniques and philosophies that skilled practitioners could blend. His integration of Soresu defense with Djem So offense created a combat style that maximized his strengths, immense power, and deep force connection, while minimizing his weaknesses, reduced speed and agility. The result was a fighting style that made him one of the most feared combatants in the galaxy, despite his physical limitations. The psychological component of Vader's defensive technique cannot be overlooked. His ability to maintain perfect defense indefinitely, showing no sign of fatigue or strain, broke opponents mentally before he destroyed them physically. Imagine facing Darth Vader, launching attacks with increasing desperation, watching every strike deflected with minimal effort as minutes stretched into extended combat. The realization would grow. Nothing you do affects him. Every attack fails. Meanwhile, he remains calm, patient, waiting. Then, in a moment of exhaustion or distraction, his counterattack comes and the duel ends. This psychological warfare through defensive mastery represented a sophisticated Sith application of Form III principles. Where Jedi might view Soresu as merciful, ending conflict through patience rather than aggression, Vader transformed it into a terror technique. His defensive perfection demonstrated absolute superiority, making opponents feel powerless before the killing blow fell. The fear he generated through this approach fed his dark side power, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of psychological dominance and physical capability. Other Sith throughout history recognized similar value in Soresu, particularly during periods when operating covertly. The form's defensive nature made it excellent for survival in hostile territory. A Sith who could deflect attacks indefinitely while escaping or holding position until reinforcements arrived increased their chances of survival dramatically. In this context, Soresu became a tool for achieving the primary Sith goal, accumulating power over time. Dead Sith gain no power. Survivors could eventually achieve dominance. The training methodology for Soresu emphasized repetition and endurance to an even greater degree than other forms. Practitioners would face remotes firing continuous streams of low-power shots, maintaining their defense for hours until defensive patterns became utterly instinctive. They would spar against multiple opponents, learning to track attacks from multiple directions while maintaining perfect defensive positioning. The mental focus required to maintain Soresu's tight defensive movements during extended combat demanded meditation and force concentration training. For Sith studying Form 3, this training took on additional dimensions. They learned to channel defensive focus through dark side energy rather than Jedi calm. Where a Jedi might achieve Soresu mastery through serene focus, a Sith found their center in controlled rage. This subtle difference in approach didn't change the physical techniques, but affected how practitioners channeled force energy through the form. A Sith's Sorasu defense carried an edge of menace that Jedi defensive technique lacked. The form's weakness against overwhelming power or numbers remained regardless of whether the practitioner served light or dark. Soresu could maintain defense almost indefinitely against standard attacks, but sufficient force concentrated in single strikes could break through even perfect defensive technique. Similarly, truly overwhelming numbers could create situations where deflecting one attack left no time to address others. These limitations meant Form 3 practitioners needed to avoid situations that played to its weaknesses. Vader's later combat style demonstrated how integrating Soresu with other forms could mitigate these weaknesses. By combining Form 3's defense with Form 5's power and elements of Form 2's precision, he created a more complete fighting style. His defense remained impenetrable when needed, but he could shift to aggressive offense or precise counterattacks as situations demanded. This flexibility, built on Soresu Foundation, made him exceptionally dangerous. The patience required for Form 3 mastery posed challenges for many Sith. The dark side fed on passion, on immediate action rather than measured response. Maintaining the calm focus Soresu demanded while channeling dark side energy created an interesting psychological tension. Sith practitioners had to learn a particular kind of controlled aggression, channeling rage not into wild attacks, but into absolute focus on defense and calculated counterattacks. The subtle offensive techniques within Soresu deserve examination. While primarily defensive, Form 3 included counterattacks designed to capitalize on openings created by opponents' failed attacks. These ripostes were typically minimal, quick thrusts or cuts aimed at disarming or wounding rather than elaborate combinations. In Sith hands, these counterattacks became more lethal, aimed at vital areas rather than simply discouraging further aggression. Soresu's blade positioning created interesting opportunities for force technique integration. The tight defensive movements kept the lightsaber constantly interposed between the practitioner and threats. But the one-handed grip common in Form 3 freed the other hand for force powers. A Sith master of Soresu might maintain perfect defense with their blade while simultaneously employing force lightning, telekinesis, or other dark side abilities. This combination of defensive lightsaber work and offensive force powers created a combat style that was extremely difficult to counter. The form's footwork emphasized careful positioning and maintaining optimal defensive stance rather than aggressive advancement or acrobatic movement. For Vader and other Sith with limited mobility, this stationary defensive approach proved ideal. They could hold positions indefinitely, their defensive technique sufficient to protect them, while other capabilities, force powers, tactical awareness, superior stamina, ground down opponents. The psychological impact of an immovable defensive position shouldn't be underestimated. Historical analysis of Form 3's effectiveness reveals that Soresu masters were extremely difficult to defeat in single combat. The few recorded instances of Soresu practitioners losing duels typically involved either overwhelming power that shattered their defense, extended combat against multiple superior opponents, or situations where the defensive approach couldn't address the tactical situation. In straightforward duels, where Soresu masters could establish their defense and maintain it, their survival rate was remarkably high. This defensive effectiveness made Form 3 valuable for any Sith seeking to ensure their survival. The Sith philosophy emphasized strength and power, but dead Sith exemplified neither. The practical recognition that surviving encounters built power over time led some Sith to value Soresu despite its defensive nature. They viewed the form as a tool for achieving ultimate goals, short-term survival, enabling long-term dominance. The relationship between Soresu and Makashi proved interesting. Form II's precision and control complemented Form III's defensive mastery. Some Sith studied both forms, recognizing that together they created a complete dueling approach. Soresu's defense to weather attacks, and Makashi's precision for efficient counterattacks. This combination, while requiring substantial training time to master both forms, produced extremely capable duelists who were almost impossible to defeat through straightforward attacks. As the Empire rose and the Jedi fell, Soresu's prominence declined, along with most lightsaber combat forms. The few remaining Jedi who had specialized in Form 3 either perished in Order 66 or were hunted down during the Great Jedi Purge. Vader himself represented one of the primary practitioners of Soresu principles during this era, though his hybrid style incorporated so many different forms that categorizing it as purely Form 3 would be misleading. The form's philosophical challenge for Sith, balancing its defensive patience with dark side aggression, meant fewer Sith mastered it compared to more aggressive forms. Those who did achieve mastery typically represented more sophisticated, dark side practitioners, individuals who understood that power came in many forms. They recognized that defensive capability was power, that survival was power, and that patience in pursuit of ultimate victory demonstrated its strength rather than weakness. Form III's legacy among the Sith therefore stands as testament to tactical flexibility. The most successful Sith weren't those who rigidly adhered to aggressive principles, but those who adapted any effective technique to serve their goals. Soresu represented one such adaptation. A form developed by Jedi for specific defensive purposes, transformed by certain Sith into a tool for survival and psychological dominance. Form 4, Adru, Fury in Motion. Where Form 3 embodied patience and defense, Form 4 represented its polar opposite, explosive offense, constant motion, and overwhelming aggression channeled through force-enhanced acrobatics. Ataru, known as the Way of the Hawkbat, or the aggression form, developed during an era when Force users sought increasingly dynamic combat techniques. For the Sith, this form offered perfect alignment with their philosophy of power through passion. Ataru didn't just allow aggression. It required it, demanded it, made aggression itself into an art of devastating beauty. The development of Form 4 traces back to ancient conflicts in the Old Republic, with documented use during the Mandalorian Wars. Practitioners recognized that the Force could enhance physical capabilities beyond normal limits, enabling movements impossible for non-Force sensitives. Ataru fully embraced this principle, incorporating acrobatics, aerial attacks, and rapid strikes that required constant force augmentation. A practitioner in Ataru's stance might leap 20 feet in the air, attack from impossible angles while spinning mid-flight, land behind their opponent, and immediately spring away before counterattacks could develop. This explosive kinetic approach created several tactical advantages. The constant movement made Ataru practitioners extremely difficult targets. Their attacks came from unpredictable angles and directions, forcing opponents into purely defensive reactions. The form's emphasis on ending combat quickly through overwhelming assault meant engagements either concluded rapidly or left the Ataru practitioner victorious through sheer momentum. For Force users who could channel sufficient energy into sustained acrobatic combat, Ataru became a devastating offensive form. The Sith recognized Form 4's potential immediately. The dark side, fueled by passion and emotion, channeled beautifully through Ataru's aggressive techniques. A Sith employing Form 4 didn't simply attack. They became a crimson blur of motion, blades striking from every conceivable angle, while dark side energy amplified their speed and power. The psychological impact of facing such an assault could break opponents before physical blows fell. Witnessing a Sith master of Ataru in full assault was terrifying, a relentless whirlwind of lethal strikes that seemed to come from everywhere simultaneously. The physical demands of Form 4 proved immense. Practitioners needed exceptional stamina to maintain the form's acrobatic assault for extended periods. The constant leaping, spinning, and rapid movements consumed energy at rates other forms couldn't match. Force augmentation helped, but couldn't entirely eliminate the metabolic cost of such explosive activity. This limitation meant Ataru worked best for shorter engagements where practitioners could bring overwhelming force to bear quickly, ending combat before exhaustion became a factor. For Sith, this physical demand aligned perfectly with their understanding of power. They trained their bodies as weapons, pushing physical limits through dark side energy. The pain and exhaustion of Ataru training became fuel for their rage, which in turn powered greater physical feats. This feedback loop, physical effort generating emotion that enhanced performance, made Form 4 particularly suitable for dark side practitioners willing to push themselves beyond normal endurance. The form's effectiveness in single combat proved remarkable. Against individual opponents, especially those trained in more static forms, Ataru's three-dimensional assault presented nearly insurmountable challenges. Defending against attacks from above, below, and all sides simultaneously while the attacker maintained constant motion demanded reflexes and awareness few possessed. Even skilled duelists found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume and unpredictability of Form 4 assault. Historical records indicate numerous Sith Lords throughout the Old Republic era favored Ataru. The form's aggressive nature matched their philosophy perfectly. Unlike Seresu's patience or Makashi's precision, Ataru demanded immediate, explosive action. Exactly what dark side combat philosophy emphasized. A Sith attacking with Form 4 embodied the dark side's essential nature, aggressive, dominant, overwhelming. The training methodology for Ataru emphasized force control as much as physical conditioning. Practitioners spent countless hours in meditation and force exercises, learning to channel energy through their bodies for enhanced speed, strength, and agility. They practiced aerial techniques repeatedly, developing the spatial awareness needed to attack effectively while airborne. They studied how to chain movements together into continuous assault that gave opponents no opportunity to respond. The form's weaknesses proved as significant as its strengths. The high energy cost meant extended combat exhausted Ataru practitioners, leaving them vulnerable if initial assault failed to conclude engagements. Multiple opponents could exploit this weakness, forcing the practitioner to expend energy dealing with threats from various directions while preventing them from focusing overwhelming assault on any single target. Confined spaces limited the acrobatic movements central to Form 4, reducing its effectiveness dramatically. Perhaps most critically, Ataru's aggressive nature left practitioners vulnerable to more defensive forms. A Soresu master, maintaining perfect defense while Ataru practitioner exhausted themselves in futile assault, could eventually counterattack against a tired opponent. Makashi's precise counterstrikes could punish the momentary exposures created by Ataru's acrobatic movements. The form's effectiveness depended heavily on circumstances and matchups. Despite these limitations, certain Sith achieved legendary status through their Ataru mastery. These practitioners understood the form's nature. It was a sprint, not a marathon. They trained to maximize their explosive power during short engagements, accepting that extended combat played against their strengths. When conditions favored Form 4, open space, single-skilled opponent, opportunity for rapid assault, they became nearly unstoppable. The mental state required for optimal Ataru execution presented interesting challenges for dark side practitioners. The form demanded aggressive action, but also required split-second tactical decisions during combat. A Sith had to maintain awareness of positioning, timing, and opponent reactions while in the midst of acrobatic assault. This combination of fury and focus represented a sophisticated approach to combat, distinguishing masters from mere practitioners. The relationship between Ataru and the dark side's nature created natural synergy in some ways, but tension in others. The form's demand for aggressive action aligned perfectly with dark side philosophy. Sometimes, its requirement for sustained focus and tactical awareness sometimes conflicted with the rage-fueled abandon the dark side often inspired. The most effective Sith practitioners of Form 4 learned to channel emotion into directed aggression rather than wild fury, using passion to enhance their capability without sacrificing tactical awareness. Form 4's acrobatic techniques required practitioners to completely reimagine combat geometry. Where other forms operated primarily on horizontal plane with occasional vertical elements, Ataru treated three-dimensional space as its combat arena. Practitioners attacked from above, leaped over opponents to strike from behind, used environment elements as launching points for aerial assaults. This three-dimensional approach created significant advantages against opponents trained primarily for ground-level combat. The force sensitivity required for true Ataru mastery meant not every Sith could employ the form effectively. Those with weaker force connections lacked the energy to maintain Form 4's acrobatic assault for meaningful duration. This limitation created an interesting selection bias. Sith who specialized in Ataru tended to be those with naturally strong Force connections, as weaker practitioners simply couldn't sustain the form's demands. The integration of Force powers into Ataru combat created additional tactical dimensions. A Sith employing Form 4 might use Force push to augment leaps, landing with greater force than simple jumping could provide. They could use Force-enhanced speed to make their already rapid strikes even faster. Some incorporated Force lightning into aerial attacks, combining physical and Force assault simultaneously. These integrations transformed Ataru from merely an acrobatic fighting style into a true Force combat form. The form's effectiveness against non-Force sensitives proved particularly noteworthy. Against opponents who couldn't track Force-enhanced movements or predict acrobatic attacks, Ataru practitioners became almost impossible to counter. The speed differential was simply too great. By the time a non-Force user registered the practitioner's location, they had already moved, attacked, and repositioned. This made Form 4 excellent for Sith operating in environments where they might face multiple non-Force sensitive opponents. The decline of Ataru prominence in later eras reflected several factors. As combat evolved toward more defensive forms and ranged weapons became prevalent, Form 4's aggressive melee approach became less tactically relevant. The physical demands that made Ataru difficult to maintain also meant fewer practitioners achieved true mastery. The form required such complete dedication that many Force users, even Sith, chose to study forms with broader applicability. The psychological impact of witnessing Ataru in action deserves emphasis. Imagine facing a Sith master of Form 4. They ignite their crimson blade and immediately launch into a spinning aerial leap, blade extending toward you from an impossible angle. You deflect desperately. Before you can counterattack, they've landed, spun, and launched another assault from a completely different direction. Again, you defend. Again, they're already moving, already attacking from a new angle. The relentlessness, the unpredictability, the sheer speed, it breaks concentration, induces panic, and creates openings that weren't there before. This psychological dimension made Ataru valuable beyond its pure technical effectiveness. A Sith, using Form 4, projected an image of unstoppable aggression, of power that couldn't be contained or controlled. This projection aligned perfectly with how Sith wanted to be perceived, as forces of nature, as inevitable as storms, and just as destructive. The form's visual impact reinforced the Sith's position as beings beyond normal limits. Form 4 represented, in many ways, the purest expression of Sith combat philosophy among the 7 classical forms. It demanded passion, rewarded aggression, required powerful Force connection, and sought to overwhelm opponents through sheer offensive dominance. Where other forms had originated as Jedi techniques that Sith adapted, Ataru felt almost purpose-built for dark side warriors. Its principles, its demands, its very nature aligned with the Sith path to power. As we continue examining how Sith approached lightsaber combat, remember, that Form 4 demonstrates a central truth about the dark side: power through action, dominance through overwhelming force, victory through relentless aggression. The Sith Master of Ataru, blade flashing in acrobatic patterns as they channeled dark side fury through force-enhanced strikes, embodied everything the Sith represented: beautiful in motion, terrible in purpose, and absolutely, utterly lethal to those who stood against them. Form 5, Shin and Djem So, the counter-attacking philosophy. Of all the lightsaber combat forms, none became more synonymous with Sith power and dominance than Form 5, known as the Way of the Krayt Dragon or the Perseverance form. This style split into two related disciplines, Shin and Djem So, each addressing specific combat scenarios while sharing a core philosophy of aggressive counterattack. Where Form 3 waited patiently for openings, Form 5 created them through overwhelming power. Where Form 2 sought victory through precision, Form 5 achieved it through dominance. For generations of Sith, Form 5 became the ultimate expression of dark side combat philosophy made tangible. The development of Form 5 arose from frustration with Form 3's limitations. Swordmasters could defend indefinitely, but struggled to conclude engagements decisively. Some practitioners, particularly among the Jedi, recognized this weakness and sought to develop a form that maintained Soresu's solid defensive foundation while adding meaningful offensive capability. The result was Form 5, which transformed defense from passive endurance into aggressive counterattack. The core philosophy of Form 5 centered on using an opponent's attacks against them. Rather than simply deflecting incoming strikes, Form 5 practitioners learned to channel the force of those attacks into devastating counterattacks. Each parry set up a riposte. Every successful defense created opportunity for offense. The form didn't seek to avoid conflict, but to meet it head-on, matching aggression with greater aggression and transforming defensive situations into offensive dominance. Shin, the first discipline of Form 5, addressed the specific challenge of deflecting blaster fire. As ranged weapons proliferated, Force users needed techniques not just to defend against projectiles, but to turn that defense into offense. Shin practitioners learned to deflect blaster bolts with maximum control, redirecting shots back toward their sources. With deadly accuracy, this transformed blaster-wielding opponents from threats into potential victims, as their own weapons became hazards when skilled Force users redirected fire. Djem So, the second discipline, focused specifically on lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat. This variant emphasized powerful, aggressive strikes designed to batter down opponents' defenses through overwhelming force. Where Makashi sought precision and Soresu maintained defense, Djem So simply overpowered opposition. Practitioners learn to channel maximum force through every strike, often using two-handed grips to generate devastating power. The philosophy was brutally simple: hit so hard that defense becomes irrelevant. The physical demands of Djem So matched its aggressive philosophy. Practitioners needed tremendous strength and stamina to maintain the form's powerful strikes. Each attack committed the user's full strength, leaving them somewhat exposed but creating such threat that opponents couldn't capitalize on brief vulnerabilities. The form's two-handed grip sacrificed some mobility and flexibility, but generated force that could shatter lesser defenses entirely. No discussion of Form 5 among the Sith can avoid focusing on the form's greatest master, Darth Vader. Both as Anakin Skywalker and after his transformation, Vader embodied everything Form 5 represented. His journey with Djem So reveals how the form evolved and adapted across his career, ultimately becoming perfectly suited to his nature as a Sith Lord. As a Jedi, Anakin demonstrated natural affinity for Form 5's aggressive counter-attacking philosophy. His combat style favored powerful strikes and relentless offense. He channeled his considerable strength through Djem So techniques, overwhelming opponents who couldn't match his power. During the Clone Wars, his mastery of Form 5 grew with each engagement, particularly during his final duel with Count Dooku aboard the Invisible Hand. That climactic encounter showcased Form 5's strength against Form 2's precision. Dooku's Makashi initially controlled the engagement through superior technique and experience. But when Anakin fully committed to Djem So's overwhelming power, channeling dark side energy through devastating strikes, precision couldn't match raw force. Vader's Djem So attacks shattered Dooku's elegant defenses, forcing the Sith Lord back until overwhelming power secured the victory. The duel demonstrated Form 5's fundamental advantage. Sufficient force, properly applied, could overcome even superior technique. After his transformation into Darth Vader, Form 5 became even more central to his combat identity. His injuries and restrictive armor eliminated the mobility and flexibility his younger self enjoyed. The acrobatic techniques he once employed became impossible. He needed a combat form that maximized his remaining strengths, immense physical power, deep force connection, and intimidating presence, while minimizing his new weaknesses. Form 5, particularly Djem So, proved perfectly suited to Vader's changed circumstances. The form's emphasis on strength over speed played to his remaining capabilities. Its two-handed power strikes didn't require quick movements, but generated tremendous force. The counter-attacking philosophy meant opponents came to him, eliminating the need for rapid advancement his armor hindered. He could establish position, maintain solid defensive stance, and simply annihilate anything that came within reach. Vader's adaptation of Form 5 incorporated techniques from other forms to create a hybrid style unique to his capabilities. He integrated Sorasu's defensive principles to shore up Form 5's occasional defensive gaps. He added elements of Makashi precision to make his powerful strikes even more effective. The result was a combat form that transcended any single classical style, becoming something specifically engineered for Darth Vader's strengths and limitations. The psychological impact of Vader's Form 5 cannot be overstated. His method of combat became part of his legend. Opponents who survived encounters described his fighting as inexorable. Constant pressure, overwhelming power, no apparent weakness. His ability to simply walk through attacks that would stagger other warriors. His blade moving in powerful patterns that shattered defenses, created an aura of invincibility. This psychological dominance amplified his physical capabilities, as opponents often defeated themselves mentally before the first blade clash. Beyond Vader, other Sith throughout history employed Form 5 with devastating effectiveness. Darth Bane, the architect of the Rule of Two, studied V Djem So extensively. His mentor Qasim recognized that Bane's physical size and strength made him ideal for Form 5's power-based approach. Bane's training in V Djem So culminated in his final duel with Qasim himself, where power and determination overcame superior technique and experience, a pattern that would repeat with Vader's victory over Dooku millennia later. The training methodology for Form 5 emphasized building tremendous physical strength and conditioning. Practitioners would train with weighted practice blades, developing the muscles needed to execute the form's powerful strikes repeatedly. They would practice against resistance, learning to drive through defending blades rather than simply making contact. They would condition their bodies to withstand the jarring impact of blade locks and the physical strain of continuous, powerful attacks. For Sith training in Form 5, this physical conditioning combined with dark side conditioning. Apprentices learned to channel rage through their strikes, using emotion to amplify physical power. They practiced attacking in fury, allowing dark side energy to flow through their bodies and into their blades. The pain of intensive training became fuel for their power, each sore muscle and aching joint feeding the rage that made their strikes even more devastating. The relationship between Form 5 and the dark side proved almost perfect. The form's aggressive philosophy aligned naturally with Sith worldview. Its emphasis on dominating opponents through overwhelming power mirrored the Sith path to dominance. Its counter-attacking principle, using opponents' strength against them, reflected the Sith understanding that power could come from any source if properly channeled. Form 5 embodied Sith philosophy in every technique. The form's effectiveness against multiple opponents proved limited, similar to other specialized forms. While Xian included some techniques for addressing multiple attackers, V Djem So's focus on powerful single strikes left practitioners vulnerable to coordinated assaults. Form 5 worked best in scenarios where practitioners could engage opponents sequentially rather than simultaneously, a limitation that tactical awareness and force powers could sometimes address but never fully eliminate. The integration of force powers into Form 5 combat created additional tactical dimensions. Practitioners could use force push to augment their strikes, landing with even greater power. They could employ force grip to manipulate opponents' positioning, creating openings for devastating attacks. Some Sith incorporated force lightning into their Form 5 technique, using one hand for saber work while the other hurled dark side energy. These integrations transformed Form 5 from purely physical combat into a comprehensive combat system. The distinction between Xian and Djem So, while clear in theory, often blurred in practice. Skilled Form 5 practitioners moved fluidly between both disciplines as situations demanded. Against blaster fire, they employed Xian deflection. When closing to melee range, they transitioned to V Djem So power strikes. This flexibility made Form 5 remarkably adaptable despite its specialization, as practitioners could address various threat types while maintaining their fundamental aggressive, counter-attacking philosophy. The effectiveness of Form 5 against Form 3 deserves particular attention, as it illustrates how forms interact strategically. Soresu's patient defense proved less effective against V Djem So's overwhelming power than against other forms. While Form 3 could theoretically deflect any attack, the sheer force behind Djem So's strikes often drove Soresu practitioners back, disrupting their positioning and creating cumulative pressure. Form 5 essentially reversed Soresu's tactical advantage. Instead of the defensive form outlasting aggressive attackers, Form 5's aggressive counterattacks could eventually overwhelm even perfect defeat. The form's legacy extends beyond individual practitioners to influence broader Sith combat philosophy. Form 5's success demonstrated that aggression, properly channeled and technically sound, could overcome more refined or defensive approaches. This lesson aligned with Sith understanding of power, that dominance came not through subtlety or patience, but through overwhelming force applied without hesitation. Future generations of Sith incorporated this lesson into their training, even when studying other forms. The visual impact of Form 5 in combat contributed to its psychological effectiveness. The powerful, committed strikes created impressive displays of force. The sparks flying, defenders driven back. The clear demonstration of overwhelming power. This visual dominance reinforced the practitioner's psychological advantage, particularly for Sith, who understood the value of inspiring fear. A Sith master of Djem So didn't just defeat opponents, they demonstrated absolute superiority through the raw force of their attacks. As the Empire rose and Vader became the preeminent symbol of Sith power, Form 5's reputation grew correspondingly. Young Force sensitives who fell to the dark side often attempted to emulate Vader's style, studying Djem So with varying success. The form's apparent simplicity just hit really hard, masked the tremendous skill and power required for true mastery. Many who attempted to employ Form 5 without proper training discovered that power without technique was simply waste. The question of whether Form 5 favored the strong or made practitioners strong proved difficult to answer. The form certainly rewarded natural strength and power, but extended training in Form 5 also developed these attributes. The conditioning required to execute the form properly built tremendous physical capability. The constant practice channeling dark side energy through powerful strikes deepened one's connection to the Force. In this way, Form 5 both attracted powerful practitioners and created them through its demands. The evolution of Form 5 from its Jedi origins to its Sith expression reveals how combat forms transcended their creator's intentions. Jedi developed the form to address practical combat limitations while maintaining their philosophical principles. Sith adopted it and transformed it into a pure expression of domination through power. The same techniques, executed with different intent and channeling different force energies, became fundamentally different in practice despite identical physical movements. Form 5 stands as perhaps the clearest example of how Sith combat philosophy differed from Jedi approaches. Both might use identical techniques, but the Sith channeled overwhelming aggression, rage, and raw power through every strike. They weren't merely counterattacking, they were dominating, crushing, destroying opposition through force that couldn't be match-keyed or endured. Form 5 in Sith hands became more than combat style. It became statement of absolute power. As we continue exploring Sith approaches to lightsaber combat, remember that Form 5 represents the culmination of aggressive, counter-attacking philosophy. From Darth Bane's power-focused approach through Anakin Skywalker's brutal effectiveness to Darth Vader's inexorable dominance, Form 5 demonstrated that overwhelming force, properly applied, could overcome virtually any opposition. The Crimson Blade moving in powerful strikes, each blow channeling dark side fury through technique perfected across centuries, remains one of the most potent symbols of Sith martial prowess. Form 6, Nyman, the balanced approach. Of all the lightsaber combat forms, Form 6 appears the most paradoxical from a Sith perspective. Nyman, also called the moderation form or the diplomat's form, emphasized balance, versatility, and integration of force powers with lightsaber technique. It sought to avoid the specialization of other forms, instead providing competent capability across all combat scenarios. This jack-of-all-trades approach seemed antithetical to Sith philosophy, which typically favored mastery and dominance through specialized excellence. Yet certain Sith recognized unique advantages in Nyman's balanced approach, adapting the form to serve the dark side in unexpected ways. The development of Form 6 arose during an era of relative peace when full-time warriors were less common among Force users. Many Jedi pursued studies in areas beyond combat, requiring a fighting form that could be maintained without the intensive training other styles demanded. Nyman answered this need by synthesizing elements from all previous forms into a balanced whole that could be practiced with moderate time investment while providing reasonable effectiveness. The core philosophy of Nyman centered on economy of effort and tactical flexibility. Rather than excel in any particular area, the form provided adequate capability in all scenarios. Practitioners could handle both blaster deflection and lightsaber duels, face single opponents or multiple attackers, fight defensively or take the offensive as situations required. This versatility came at the cost of not matching specialist effectiveness. A Nyman practitioner facing a Makashi master in formal duel or a V Djem So expert in pure power exchange would find themselves at disadvantage. What distinguished Nyman most significantly was its emphasis on force power integration. More than any other form, Nyman incorporated telekinetic attacks, force pushes and pulls, and even more esoteric abilities directly into lightsaber sequences. Practitioners learned to flow seamlessly between physical strikes and force techniques, creating combat style that addressed threats on multiple levels simultaneously. This integration made Nyman particularly effective against opponents who focused purely on blade work while providing advantages in chaotic combat, where versatility mattered more than specialization. For Sith, Nyman's balanced approach initially seemed wasteful. Why study adequate technique in multiple areas when mastery of one could provide dominance? Yet, certain dark side practitioners recognize situations where versatility offered distinct advantages. Sith operating covertly, unable to reveal their true nature through overwhelming displays of power, found Neiman's moderate effectiveness useful for handling threats, without showcasing specialized mastery that might expose them. The form's integration of force powers also appealed to Sith, who preferred channeling dark side energy through multiple vectors rather than purely through lightsaber technique. The most surprising and significant Sith master of Form 6 was Darth Maul. The Zebrak Sith Lord, trained personally by Darth Sidious, demonstrated that Naiman could be transformed into something far more dangerous than its reputation suggested. Maul's approach to the form revealed how Sith adaptation could elevate even supposedly moderate techniques to extraordinary effectiveness. Maul's unique weapon, a double-bladed lightsaber or saber staff, changed Naiman's combat dynamics dramatically. The form's emphasis on balance and moderate movements suited the saber staff perfectly, as controlling two blades simultaneously required precisely the kind of coordination and measured approach Naiman taught. The weapon's reach advantage and ability to attack from both ends aligned with Form 6's philosophy of creating multiple threat vectors that opponents couldn't easily counter. But Maul didn't simply use Naiman as Jedi had developed it. He infused the form with dark side aggression, transforming its measured balance into a whirling assault that overwhelmed opponents through the sheer unpredictability of saber staff attacks combined with sudden force techniques. His integration of force powers wasn't merely supplementary to blade work, but equal components of his assault, creating combat style that opponents couldn't anticipate or effectively counter. Maul's famous duel with Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi on Naboo showcased Naiman's potential when executed by a Sith master. His saber staff attacks came from multiple angles simultaneously, while he interspersed force pushes and acrobatic movements. The combination of techniques from Form 6's balanced repertoire, enhanced by his specialized weapon and dark side power, proved sufficient to defeat a Jedi master and nearly triumph over his Padawan. Only Obi-Wan's desperate improvisation, using a technique Maul didn't anticipate, secured Jedi victory. The training methodology for Naiman emphasized breadth over depth. Practitioners studied elements from all previous forms without specializing in any particular style. They practiced force technique integration extensively, learning to weave telekinetic attacks into lightsaber sequences. They trained against various opponent types and combat scenarios, developing adaptability rather than optimizing for specific situations. This broad training approach made Naiman accessible to those without time for specialized form mastery, but also created the ceiling that limited its effectiveness against true specialists. For Sith studying Neiman, the training took different directions. Rather than seeking moderate competence across all areas, they pushed specific elements that aligned with their strengths. A Sith with powerful force connection might emphasize Neiman's telekinetic integration while maintaining adequate blade work. Another might focus on the form's saber staff techniques, transforming the balanced foundation into specialized weapon mastery. This selective emphasis allowed Sith to gain Naiman's versatility benefits while avoiding the mediocrity trap that often limited the form's effectiveness. The psychological component of Naiman proved subtler than more aggressive forms, but no less significant. Practitioners who could shift seamlessly between different tactical approaches kept opponents off balance, unable to predict what would come next. A Neiman user might defend conservatively one moment, then launch aggressive assault the next, then employ force techniques from range. This unpredictability created mental pressure that complemented physical threats, particularly when Sith added Dunmuk psychological tactics to Niman's technical versatility. The form's effectiveness against specialized forms depended heavily on practitioner skill and circumstances. A mediocre Naiman practitioner would lose to specialists in their areas of expertise, but a true master of Form 6 could exploit specialist weaknesses using range against Makashi practitioners, employing force techniques to disrupt a Taru. The integration of force powers into Naiman combat created particular synergy with dark side abilities. Sith, employing Form 6, could weave Force Lightning, Force Choke, and other dark side techniques directly into combat sequences. The Form's philosophy of balanced threat distribution meant opponents couldn't focus purely on defending against blade or force attacks. They had to address both simultaneously. This forced opponents into reactive postures where Sith controlled engagement tempo. The relationship between Naiman and Jar Kai, the practice of wielding two lightsabers, proved significant. Form 6's balanced foundation and emphasis on coordination made it natural precursor to dual blade techniques. Maul's saber staff expertise built on Naiman principles, as did Asajj Ventress's dual saber style. The form taught practitioners to manage multiple threat vectors and coordinate complex attack patterns, skills that transferred directly to dual blade combat. The Grand Inquisitor's use of Form 6 with his specialized spinning lightsaber demonstrated continued Sith adaptation of Naiman principles. His weapon combined saber staff concepts with additional mechanical complexity, requiring precisely the kind of coordination and balance Form 6 emphasized. His ability to switch between defensive spinning patterns and aggressive strikes showcased how Naiman's versatility could be channeled through unconventional weapons to create unique combat styles. The form's reputation as the diplomat's form stemmed from its popularity among Jedi, who prioritized non-combat studies. This association led many to underestimate Neiman's potential, viewing it as form for those who couldn't or wouldn't commit to more demanding styles. Sith, who recognized this perceptual bias, could exploit it. Opponents who expected moderate competence from Naiman practitioners could be caught off guard when facing Sith, who had elevated the form beyond its reputation. The philosophical alignment between Naiman and Sith ideology proved more complex than with other forms. The form's emphasis on balance and moderation seemed to conflict with Sith beliefs in power through passion and specialization. Yet, the underlying principle, achieving effective results through efficient methods, aligned perfectly with pragmatic Sith approaches. The best tools for victory weren't necessarily the flashiest or most specialized, but the ones that actually secured success. Historical analysis of Form 6 reveals that its effectiveness varied dramatically based on practitioner skill and commitment. mediocre students produced mediocre results, giving the form its reputation as weak. But true masters, particularly Sith who pushed beyond conventional boundaries, transformed Naaman into something far more capable. The form's ceiling proved higher than many assumed. It simply required exceptional skill to reach, rather than specialist dedication to narrow focus. The tactical flexibility Naaman provided proved particularly valuable for Sith operating in varied circumstances. A Sith agent who might face Jedi one day, multiple non-Force sensitive opponents the next, and assassination target requiring stealth the day after needed versatility more than specialization. Form 6's balanced capabilities address this need, providing adequate techniques for various scenarios without requiring multiple form mastery. The integration of environmental manipulation into Naaman combat deserves examination. The form's force power emphasis included using surroundings as weapons, pulling objects as projectiles, pushing opponents into hazards, using telekinesis to create barriers or weapons. Sith employing these techniques transformed combat environments into deadly arenas where everything became potential threat. This environmental combat proved especially effective when Naaman practitioners deliberately chose or modified battlefields to maximize their tactical advantages. The form's defensive capabilities, while less absolute than Soresu, proved sufficient for most situations. Naaman taught practitioners to maintain adequate guard while positioning for counterattacks or force techniques. This moderate defense couldn't match Form 3's imperviousness, but required less energy to maintain, leaving more reserves for offensive actions. For Sith who preferred aggressive tactics, this trade-off between perfect defense and sustained offense often proved acceptable. The relationship between Naaman and other forms revealed interesting strategic possibilities. Practitioners who studied Form 6 alongside more specialized forms gained ability to shift between balanced approach and specialized tactics as situations demanded. A Sith who knew both Naaman and Jem so could employ versatile techniques against uncertain opponents, then shift to overwhelming power when favorable matchup appeared. This metatactical flexibility added another dimension to combat capability beyond any single form's techniques. The question of whether Naaman represented a lesser form proved more complex than simple answers suggested. For students seeking minimum combat capability with minimum training investment, it was indeed the most accessible option. For dedicated warriors pursuing combat mastery, more specialized forms offered greater potential within their domains. But for practitioners who valued versatility and tactical flexibility, or who planned to use combat capability as one tool among many, Naaman provided exactly what they needed. Maul's legacy with Form 6 demonstrated that the form's reputation as moderate or weak stemmed more from typical practitioners than from the form itself. In the hands of a Sith Lord who fully committed to elevating the form, who trained intensively despite its moderate reputation, who adapted its techniques to unique weapons and circumstances, Naaman became deadly. The form didn't make practitioners weak. Weak practitioners gave the form that reputation. As we continue examining Sith approaches to lightsaber combat, Form 6 serves as a reminder that effectiveness depends less on which form is studied than on how completely it's mastered and adapted. The balanced nature Nyman provided could be foundation for either mediocrity or mastery. Mastery, depending entirely on practitioner commitment and skill. For Sith who recognized this truth, Form 6 offered unique opportunities to surprise opponents who underestimated its potential or to develop versatile combat capability suitable for varied operational requirements. The Crimson Blade moving through Nyman's balanced patterns, backed by dark side force techniques and adapted to unique circumstances, might lack the dramatic flair of a Taru or the obvious power of Djem So. But in the hands of a true master, it proved no less deadly, merely deadly in different, less obvious, and potentially more unpredictable ways. Form 7. Juyo and Vaapad, embracing the ferocity. At the apex of lightsaber combat, at the dangerous edge where technique meets raw emotional power, stands Form 7, known as Juyo, the ferocity form, or the way of the Vornsker. This final classical form represented the most aggressive, unpredictable, and controversial approach to lightsaber combat. Later, refined into Vaapad by Jedi Master Mace Windu, Form 7 demanded practitioners walk a razor's edge between controlled aggression and complete abandon. For the Sith, who had no fear of the dark side's seductive pull, Juyo became the ultimate expression of their combat philosophy. Ferocity made technical, rage-given form, the dark side channeled through blade work with devastating effect. The origins of Form 7 stretch back millennia, developing during eras of intense conflict when conventional forms proved insufficient against the most dangerous opponents. Some scholars believe Sith developed the original Juyo techniques, later adopted and feared by the Jedi Order. Whether this origin story proves true or not, the form's nature aligned perfectly with dark side philosophy: aggressive assault, emotional investment, overwhelming pressure designed to break opponents physically and psychologically. The core principle of Juyo centered on unpredictability through controlled chaos. Practitioners attacked from unexpected angles with varying rhythms, switching instantly between offensive techniques without warning or apparent pattern. This created the impression of complete chaos, of a warrior who had abandoned all discipline in favor of pure aggression. In reality, true Juyo masters maintained perfect awareness and control while channeling emotional intensity through seemingly random attack sequences. The physical demands of Form 7 exceeded even Atru's requirements. The constant shifting between techniques, the explosive bursts of speed, the aggressive footwork that maintained pressure from all angles, all consumed tremendous energy. But unlike Ataru's straightforward, acrobatic assault, Juyo incorporated feints, misdirection, and psychological elements that forced opponents to expend mental energy trying to predict or counter attacks that defied prediction. The emotional component distinguished Form 7 from all other forms. Where other styles taught practitioners to fight with calm focus or controlled aggression, Juyo demanded practitioners embrace their emotions completely: fear, anger, hate, even joy in combat. Form 7 channeled all these feelings into overwhelming assault. This emotional investment made the form dangerous, not just to opponents, but to practitioners themselves. The line between controlled emotional channeling and complete emotional surrender proved perilously thin. For the Sith, these dangers represented no concern whatsoever. They had already embraced the dark side completely. The emotional intensity Jedi feared as path to corruption was, for Sith, simply the natural state of existence. Sith practitioners of Juyo didn't worry about falling to the dark side. They were already there, and Form 7 allowed them to channel their dark side nature through technically refined combat in ways other forms couldn't match. Darth Sidious, later revealed as Emperor Palpatine, achieved so mastery of Juyo that he considered it essentially a Sith form. His training of Darth Maul incorporated extensive Juyo instruction, teaching his apprentice to channel the form's ferocious techniques through dark side power. Sidious himself could employ Form 7 with such speed and unpredictability that opponents barely registered his movements before finding themselves cut down. The Emperor's famous duel against multiple Jedi Masters in his office showcased Juyo's terrifying effectiveness. He moved with speed that seemed impossible, his blade appearing in multiple places simultaneously. As he struck down Kit Fisto, Agen Kala, and Saesee Tiin within seconds. Only Mace Windu, a fellow Form 7 master, could match Sidious's speed and technique. The duel between two masters of different Form 7 variants, Sidious's pure Juyo against Windu's refined Vaapad, became one of history's most significant lightsaber confrontations. Darth Maul's approach to Form 7 exemplified how Sith transformed Juyo into a weapon of pure aggression. His training under Sidious had been brutal, pushing him beyond normal limits. To achieve the physical conditioning and dark side power needed for sustained Form 7 assault, Maul's inner rage, cultivated and refined through years of harsh training, became fuel for his combat technique rather than weakness to be suppressed. During his duel with Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, Maul demonstrated Juyo's overwhelming nature. His attacks came from constantly shifting angles, his blade moving in patterns that defied conventional defensive response. He dominated Qui-Gon, a skilled Ataru master, through sheer aggressive pressure that gave the Jedi Master no opportunity to utilize his own form's offensive capabilities. Only the temporary barrier of the laser gates gave Qui-Gon brief respite from the relentless assault. The psychological impact of facing a Form 7 master proved as significant as the physical threat. Imagine confronting a Sith, employing Juyo. Their first strike comes from above. You barely parry. Instantly they have shifted low, attacking your legs. You defend desperately. Before you can counter, they're striking at your shoulder from an impossible angle. The speed, the unpredictability, the sense that you're always reacting and never acting. It breaks concentration and creates openings that weren't there before. This psychological warfare aspect aligned perfectly with Sith combat philosophy. They didn't merely seek to defeat opponents, but to dominate them, to demonstrate absolute superiority before delivering killing blows. Juyo's nature, aggressive, chaotic seeming, overwhelming, projected exactly this image. A Sith master of Form 7 appeared as force of nature, as unstoppable as hurricane and just as indifferent to opposition's resistance. The training methodology for Juyo emphasized developing ability to channel intense emotion while maintaining technical precision. Practitioners needed to reach mental state where they could be simultaneously consumed by feeling and perfectly aware of tactical situations. This combination of abandon and control represented the form's central challenge. Students who achieved pure abandon lost technical effectiveness. Those who maintained rigid control couldn't generate the emotional intensity that made Form 7 devastating. For Sith training in Juyo, the emphasis fell heavily on embracing dark side emotions. Apprentices learned to channel rage, fear, and hatred through their strikes. They practiced attacking in genuine fury, allowing dark side energy to flow freely while maintaining enough awareness to execute proper technique. The pain of training and Sith training in Form 7 was deliberately painful, became additional fuel for the rage that powered their attacks. The form's footwork deserves special attention. Unlike other forms with more structured movement patterns, Juyo's footwork appeared almost random. Practitioners shifted weight constantly, never settling into predictable stance. They moved forward and back, side to side, even in circles around opponents, all while maintaining aggressive assault. This unpredictable movement made defending against Form 7 difficult. Opponents couldn't anticipate attack angles when the attacker's position changed constantly. The distinction between Juyo and Vaapad illuminates different approaches to Form 7's challenges. Juyo, the original variant, embraced emotional intensity without particularly constraining it. Vaapad, Mace Windu's refinement, created a superconducting loop that channeled opponents' dark side energy back against them while using practitioners' own darkness as additional power source. Both variants involved emotional combat, but Vaapad added a reflective component that could overwhelm opponents with their own aggression. For Sith facing Jedi practitioners of Vaapad, this reflective nature created interesting tactical challenges. Their own dark side power, channeled through Juyo assaults, could be turned against them by Vaapad masters. This made confrontations between Juyo and Vaapad practitioners particularly intense. Battles where emotional and technical intensity fed back and forth between combatants, each trying to overwhelm the other through their own strength reflected and amplified. Darth Vader's relationship with Form 7 proved complicated. As Anakin Skywalker, he had dabbled in Juyo, but favored Form 5's more straightforward power approach. After his transformation, his physical limitations made Form 7's demanding footwork and explosive movements difficult. However, he retained understanding of Juyo's principles and occasionally incorporated its unpredictable attack angles into his hybrid style. The psychological intensity that made Juyo effective also suited Vader's intimidating presence perfectly. The form's effectiveness against multiple opponents proved mixed. Form 7's unpredictable assault could keep multiple attackers off balance, unable to coordinate effectively when they couldn't predict the practitioner's movements or attacks. However, the energy expenditure and focus required for Juyo made extended combat against numerous opponents exhausting. The form worked best in situations where its overwhelming initial assault could quickly reduce opponent numbers or create opportunities for escape. The integration of force powers into Juyo combat created additional dimensions of threat. Practitioners could intersperse force pushes, lightning, or other abilities into their physical assault without telegraphing when blade strikes would shift to force attacks. This seamless integration of multiple threat types, combined with Form 7's already unpredictable nature, made defending against Juyo masters exceptionally difficult. The philosophical implications of Juyo's nature fascinated certain Sith scholars. The form represented ultimate expression of Sith belief that power came through passion. It demonstrated that technique and emotion, rather than being opposed, could synergize to create capability greater than either alone. This lesson, that the dark side's emotional intensity could enhance rather than degrade combat effectiveness, influenced how later generations of Sith approached all aspects of Force use. The form's controversial nature among Jedi created deeply interesting tactical advantages for Sith practitioners. Many Jedi received no training in recognizing or defending against Juyo, as the Council restricted its teaching so severely. When these Jedi faced Sith employing Form 7, they encountered completely unfamiliar combat style with no basis for understanding or countering it. This unfamiliarity gave Juyo practitioners substantial initial advantage in any engagement. The physical conditioning required for Form 7 mastery exceeded most other forms' demands. The explosive movements, constant position changes, and sustained aggressive assault required tremendous stamina and strength. Sith training regimens for Juyo pushed apprentices to their physical limits and beyond, using pain and exhaustion to fuel the rage that powered the form. Surviving this training created warriors with exceptional physical capabilities and deep dark side connections. The mental conditioning proved equally demanding. Practitioners needed to maintain tactical awareness while in states of intense emotional arousal. They had to make split-second decisions about attack angles and techniques while channeling powerful feelings through their strikes. This combination of emotion and analysis represented sophisticated force use that only the most capable practitioners could achieve. The question of whether Form 7 was inherently a dark side form sparked debate among Force users throughout history. Mace Windu demonstrated that light side users could employ Form 7 variants without falling to darkness, though his Vaapad was specifically designed to address this challenge. Yet, the high failure rate among Jedi who studied. The legacy of Form 7 among the Sith proved enduring. Generation after generation of dark side practitioners studied Juyo, recognizing its effectiveness and philosophical alignment with their beliefs. Even Sith, who primarily employed other forms, often incorporated elements of Juyo's unpredictable assault into their personal styles. The form influenced Sith combat philosophy broadly, reinforcing beliefs that emotional intensity enhanced rather than degraded capability. The visual impact of Juyo in combat contributed to its psychological effectiveness. The seemingly chaotic blade movement, the practitioner's visible intensity, the speed of assault that appeared to defy physical laws, all created impressive display that reinforced the Sith's image as beings beyond normal limits. Spectators or opponents witnessing Form 7 assault saw power made visible, aggressive dominance manifest in blade work. The form's ultimate limitation proved to be its demands on practitioners. Not every Force user possessed the physical capability, mental discipline, or Force connection to employ Form 7 effectively. Among Sith, this created a selection effect. Those who mastered Juyo tended to be already among the most capable, as lesser practitioners simply couldn't meet the form's requirements. This meant Form 7, while devastating in capable hands, remained relatively rare even among the Sith. As we conclude our examination of the classical 7 forms, Form 7 stands as perhaps the ultimate expression of Sith combat philosophy. Aggressive, emotional, overwhelming, unpredictable, Juyo embodied everything the Sith represented in combat. The Crimson Blade moving through Form 7's patterns, backed by dark side fury channeled through technical mastery, represented the apex of Sith lightsaber combat. Not the most common form, not necessarily the most versatile, but in its pure expression of power through passion, possibly the most Sith of all the classical forms. Forbidden techniques beyond the 7 forms. The 7 classical forms represented standardized, systematized approaches to lightsaber combat developed and refined over millennia. Yet, combat, particularly at the desperate edge where survival hangs in balance, often demands techniques outside formal systems. Throughout galactic history, various practitioners developed methods that violated conventional principles, sacrificed honor for effectiveness, or proved so dangerous that even those who knew them hesitated to employ them. These forbidden techniques existed in the shadows of lightsaber lore, known to few, practiced by fewer, and representing the extreme measures that only the desperate or the utterly pragmatic would consider. Among the Sith, who acknowledged no moral constraints and embraced any effective path to victory, these forbidden techniques found more acceptance than among the Jedi. Yet, even dark side practitioners recognized that some methods carried risks beyond mere physical danger, risks of becoming predictable, of losing respect among other warriors, or of developing dependencies on techniques that could be countered once opponents understood them. The question wasn't whether to learn forbidden techniques, but rather when and how to employ them for maximum effect. The most infamous forbidden technique was Trakata, the method of deactivating and reactivating one's lightsaber during combat. The principle seems simple. Turn off your blade at unexpected moments to bypass opponent defenses, then reignite it for strikes they couldn't block. In practice, Trakata required split-second timing, tremendous confidence, and willingness to accept the vulnerability that came with an extinguished blade. The technique carried no formal structure like the classical forms, but rather represented a combat philosophy that could be applied in various ways. The specific techniques within Trakata included pass the blade, where practitioners would deactivate their lightsaber during a blade lock, pass their hilt around or through opponent's blade, then reignite for strike from unexpected angle. Unbalancing block involved establishing blade contact with opponent's weapon, then deactivating to eliminate resistance and cause them to stumble forward from their own momentum. Flash Slash used rapid activation and deactivation to vary blade length unpredictably, creating confusion about the weapon's reach and striking distance. The Jedi considered Trakata thoroughly dishonorable. Their combat philosophy emphasized honest engagement, meeting opponents with blade active and intentions clear. Deactivating one's weapon during combat struck them as deception unworthy of Force users. The technique violated their sense of fair combat, suggesting the practitioner lacked confidence in their ability to win through straightforward skill. This moral objection kept most Jedi from studying Trakata, despite its potential effectiveness. Ironically, even the Sith generally disdained Trakata, though for different reasons than the Jedi. Sith viewed the momentary blade deactivation as an admission of weakness, suggesting the practitioner couldn't defeat opponents with their lightsaber continuously active. For warriors who drew power from displays of dominance and overwhelming force, the subtle misdirection of Trakata seemed almost cowardly. A Sith Lord wanted opponents to see their blade coming, to recognize their doom approaching, and be powerless to prevent it. Trakata's deception undermined this psychological domination. Yet, pragmatic Sith recognized situations where Trakata's effectiveness outweighed concerns about honor or image. When facing superior opponents, when survival took precedence over pride, when tactical advantage mattered more than dramatic victory. In these circumstances, the forbidden technique offered real benefits. Some Sith practiced Trakata secretly, maintaining ability to employ it while publicly disdaining the technique to avoid revealing a potential trump card. The recent appearance of Trakata in high-level combat, particularly during confrontations between powerful Force users in the High Republic era, demonstrated the technique's enduring relevance. The Stranger, a mysterious Sith Lord, employed Trakata with devastating effectiveness against multiple Jedi, turning their own expectations about continuous blade engagement against them. His use of the technique, combined with Cortosis armor that could temporarily disable opponents' lightsabers, created combat style that frustrated conventional defensive approaches. This modern resurgence of Trakata reveals important truth about forbidden techniques. They remain forbidden not because they don't work, but precisely because they do work, often too well. When standard forms become so ingrained that practitioners expect certain behaviors, techniques that violate those expectations gain tremendous advantage. The Jedi who faced the Stranger weren't prepared for combat where their opponent's blade might disappear mid-strike, creating openings that shouldn't exist. Their training in the seven forms, comprehensive though it was, didn't address opponent who refused to play by established rules. The vulnerability inherent in Trakata cannot be overlooked. Every moment with blade deactivated was a moment of genuine danger. An observant opponent could recognize the technique being employed and counter with their own blade deactivation, or simply thrust toward the practitioner's core while they had no active defense. This vulnerability meant Trakata worked best against opponents who didn't expect it. The element of surprise proved crucial to the technique's effectiveness. For Sith training, this meant Trakata required not just technical practice, but also tactical judgment about when to employ it. Apprentices who learned the technique needed to understand it wasn't a primary combat method, but a situational tool to be used sparingly for maximum impact. Overuse made the technique predictable and therefore uncounterable. Used once or twice per engagement at unexpected moments, it could create decisive openings. Used constantly, it became a weakness opponents could exploit. Beyond Trakata, other forbidden or semi-forbidden techniques existed in the shadows of lightsaber lore. Shiak, the deliberate stabbing technique, rather than the slashing strikes most forms emphasized, was considered dishonorable by Jedi, but found ready acceptance among Sith. The technique proved brutally effective. A precise thrust to vital areas ended combat immediately. Darth Maul's killing of Qui-Gon Jinn demonstrated Shiak's lethality, as did Emperor Palpatine's similar strike against Agen Kalar during their office confrontation. Telekinetic lightsaber combat, the practice of wielding one's blade entirely through the Force rather than physical grip, represented another technique that existed outside the seven forms. This method allowed practitioners to attack from range, control multiple lightsabers simultaneously, or maintain offense while their hands were occupied with other tasks. The demands on Force control were immense, making this technique accessible only to the most powerful practitioners. Yet, Sith with sufficient skill could create combat styles, unlike anything classical forms addressed. The integration of these forbidden techniques into established forms created hybrid fighting styles unique to individual practitioners. A Sith master of Form 5 might incorporate occasional Trakata feints into their V Djem So power strikes, creating unpredictable moments of misdirection within otherwise straightforward, aggressive assault. A Form II specialist could use Shiak techniques to capitalize on Makashi's precise positioning, turning the elegant dueling form into mechanism for efficient killing. These hybridizations demonstrated that true combat mastery transcended rigid adherence to any single system. For Sith, no techniques were formally forbidden in this sense. The rule of two encouraged apprentices to study any method that might grant advantage, as eventually they would need every edge to defeat their masters. Darth Bane's philosophy explicitly rejected the restrictions previous Sith had placed on their students. If knowledge existed, if techniques worked, then studying them made practitioners stronger. The only true restriction was effectiveness. Techniques that didn't actually improve combat capability were waste of training time regardless of their moral status. This philosophical difference created interesting dynamics in conflicts between Jedi and Sith. The Jedi, bound by their principles, wouldn't employ certain techniques even when they might prove tactically advantageous. The Sith, unconstrained by such concerns, would use any effective method. This asymmetry gave Sith practitioners advantage in that Jedi often weren't prepared for techniques their own order prohibited, while Sith trained to expect and counter anything opponents might employ. The psychological component of forbidden techniques deserves examination. Beyond their tactical effectiveness, these methods carried reputational weight. A practitioner known to use Trakata might find opponents approach them more cautiously, uncertain when the blade might disappear. This wariness could be exploited. The threat of Trakata became a psychological tool, even when not actually employed. Similarly, a Sith known for Shi'ak killing strikes forced opponents to defend vital areas more thoroughly, potentially creating openings elsewhere. The training methodology for forbidden techniques varied significantly from classical forms. The seven forms had centuries of refined pedagogy, with established sequences for learning techniques and building skill progressively. Forbidden methods often lacked such structured instruction, existing more as concepts that skilled practitioners developed through experimentation and personal practice. This meant learning them required different approach, less formal training, more creative exploration of possibilities within the broad concepts. For Sith who studied these techniques, the lack of formal structure proved less problematic than for Jedi. Sith training already emphasized personal exploration and development of individual approaches. Apprentices were expected to discover what worked for them rather than simply memorizing established sequences. Forbidden techniques fit naturally into this philosophical approach. They represented extreme expressions of the principle that effectiveness mattered more than tradition or honor. The relationship between forbidden techniques and the Force proved interesting. Trakata, for instance, required precise force control to gauge exact moments for deactivation and reactivation. The split-second timing couldn't rely on physical reflexes alone, but demanded force-enhanced awareness of opponent positions, intentions, and likely reactions. This meant forbidden techniques, despite being outside the seven forms, still required sophisticated force use. They weren't shortcuts, but rather alternative approaches that demanded different skills. The evolution of forbidden techniques across galactic history reflected changing combat realities. Methods dismissed as impractical during eras of formal dueling might prove valuable during chaotic battlefield conflicts. Techniques considered desperate measures by one generation might become respected alternatives for another. This evolution demonstrated that forbidden status often reflected specific historical contexts rather than absolute tactical invalidity. The question of whether forbidden techniques represented corruption or evolution in lightsaber combat sparked ongoing debate among Force scholars. Conservative voices argued that the seven forms, refined over millennia, represented perfected combat systems that addressed all necessary scenarios. Deviations from these established methods reflected either desperation or moral compromise. Progressive voices countered that combat evolved constantly, requiring continual adaptation and innovation. Forbidden techniques represented this evolution, bringing new capabilities that classical forms couldn't address. For Sith, this debate held little interest. They cared about results, not philosophical consistency. If forbidden techniques worked, they would be studied and employed. If they didn't provide actual advantage, they would be abandoned regardless of how interesting or controversial they seemed. This pragmatic approach meant Sith practitioners often achieved more complete understanding of forbidden techniques than Jedi scholars who studied them purely academically. As we continue exploring Sith combat approaches, remember that forbidden techniques reveal essential truth about dark side philosophy. There are no true prohibitions, only tools waiting to be used. The Sith, who understood this, who studied what others feared or disdained, who practiced techniques their opponents wouldn't expect, these practitioners gained advantages that sometimes proved decisive. the crimson blade flickering in and out of existence through Trakata, or driving forward in Shiak thrust with lethal precision, represented Sith willingness to embrace any effective path to power. The Mek, the art of mental warfare. Beyond physical technique and force powers, beyond the 7 classical forms and forbidden methods, existed another dimension of Sith combat that proved equally devastating. Dun Mok, the ancient art of psychological warfare integrated directly into lightsaber duels. This practice transformed combat from merely physical contest into battle that simultaneously attacked opponent's body, mind, and spirit. For the Sith, who understood that true victory meant complete dominance, Dun Mok represented a crucial component of combat philosophy, sometimes proving more effective than even the most refined blade work. The origins of Dun Mok traced back to the earliest Sith, perhaps even predating their encounters with the Dark Jedi, who would become the first Sith Lords. The native Sith species possessed an intuitive understanding that combat involved more than exchanging blows. It required breaking opponents' will, undermining their confidence, exploiting fears and doubts. When the Dark Jedi arrived and merged with Sith culture, they refined these intuitive practices into systematic techniques that could be taught and mastered like lightsaber forms. The core principle of Dun Mok involved using taunts, jeers, and psychological attacks to erode opponents' mental state during combat. Practitioners would expose opponents' weaknesses, question their beliefs, mock their skills, or reveal painful truths designed to provoke emotional responses. For Jedi opponents particularly, this psychological assault proved devastatingly effective. Their training emphasized emotional control and serenity, making any disruption to mental state potentially catastrophic for their combat effectiveness. The technique's name itself carried weight. Dun Mok translated roughly to domination through intimidation, or victory through mental superiority. This name reflected Sith understanding that physical defeat represented only one component of victory. True triumph required demonstrating not just superior combat capability, but absolute dominance across all dimensions. An opponent might be physically defeated, yet retain sense of having fought well, of having nearly succeeded. Dun Mok sought to eliminate even this psychological consolation, leaving victims broken in spirit as well as body. The practical application of Dun Mok proved more sophisticated than simple taunting. Effective practitioners carefully analyzed opponents beforehand, identifying specific vulnerabilities, doubts, or fears. During combat, they would strike at these identified weak points with surgical precision, using words or force-projected emotions to trigger maximum psychological impact. This required deep understanding of psychology combined with real-time assessment of how opponents reacted to specific approaches. Consider Darth Vader's masterful use of Dun Mok. During his confrontation with Obi-Wan Kenobi on the Death Star, his words were calculated to wound, "When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master." This statement simultaneously claimed superior power and reminded Obi-Wan of his failure to save Anakin from the dark side. Later, during his pursuit of Luke Skywalker, Vader's taunts about turning Leia to the dark side proved so effective they broke Luke's emotional control completely, triggering the fury that nearly killed Vader himself. The integration of Dun Moch into lightsaber combat required remarkable mental capability. Practitioners had to maintain 3 parallel streams of awareness simultaneously: physical combat technique, force manipulation, and psychological assessment and attack. They needed to parry incoming strikes while formulating verbal assaults, while monitoring opponent reactions, while planning next movements. This cognitive multitasking separated masters from practitioners who merely knew the theory. Count Dooku demonstrated particularly refined Dun Moch technique. His aristocratic bearing and cultured speech made his psychological attacks more cutting. Against Anakin Skywalker, he would comment on the young Jedi's inferior training, his crude technique, his inadequacies. These words, delivered with aristocratic disdain in cultured tones, proved the psychological principles underlying Dun Moch proved surprisingly sophisticated. Practitioners understood that different personalities responded to different approaches. Some opponents proved vulnerable to attacks on their competence, others to challenges to their beliefs, still others to threats against those they cared about. Effective Dun Moch required reading opponent psychology rapidly and adjusting approaches based on observed reactions. The technique's effectiveness against Jedi stemmed from specific vulnerabilities in Jedi training. The Jedi emphasized emotional control achieved through suppression rather than mastery. They taught students to avoid anger, fear, and other powerful emotions rather than learning to function effectively while experiencing them. This left them particularly vulnerable to techniques designed to provoke exactly those suppressed emotions. A Jedi facing Dun Moch assault often found years of careful emotional training crumbling under calculated psychological pressure. For force-sensitive opponents without Jedi training, Dun Moch worked differently, but often proved equally effective. Non-Jedi lacked the emotional suppression training that made Jedi vulnerable, but they also typically lacked defenses against force-projected emotional attacks. A Sith master of Dun Moch could use the Force itself to amplify fear, doubt, or confusion, creating psychological pressure that purely verbal taunts couldn't achieve. The training methodology for Dun Moch among the Sith emphasized understanding psychology alongside combat technique. Apprentices studied common fears and psychological vulnerabilities. They practiced maintaining focus on multiple tasks simultaneously. They learned to observe subtle indicators of emotional state, breathing patterns, stance shifts, facial expressions that revealed how opponents were responding to psychological pressure. This training transformed them into not just warriors, but psychological predators. The relationship between Dun Moch and the dark side proved interesting. The technique required practitioners to project confidence, dominance, and psychological strength even when facing challenging opponents. This projection itself became a form of dark side meditation. By acting absolutely confident, practitioners actually became more confident. The feedback loop between projected dominance and genuine psychological strength reinforced itself, creating mental state that enhanced both Dunmok's effectiveness and overall combat capability. The technique's vulnerabilities deserve examination. Dunmok proved most effective against opponents who allowed psychological attacks to affect them. Opponents who had achieved true emotional mastery, not suppression, but genuine control, could simply disregard verbal assaults and remain focused on physical combat. Obi-Wan Kenobi demonstrated this against Darth Maul, maintaining composure despite psychological pressure, then exploiting Maul's overconfidence for decisive victory. Additionally, Dunmok could backfire spectacularly. Psychological attacks that failed to affect opponents could reveal practitioners' own insecurities or concerns. An opponent who recognized the specific nature of taunts could gain insight into what the attacker feared or considered important. This reversal of information flow could be exploited by clever opponents, particularly those trained in psychological analysis themselves. The question of whether Jedi could employ Dunmok ethically sparked philosophical debate. Some argued the technique required dark side philosophy and therefore remained fundamentally incompatible with Jedi principles. Others suggested that psychological warfare, when used to end combat without killing or to encourage opponents to surrender, could align with Jedi goals of preserving life. Historical records include few examples of Jedi using Dunmok effectively, suggesting either philosophical prohibition or simple lack of training made it rare among light side practitioners. The most successful practitioners of Dunmok shared certain characteristics. They possessed exceptional self-confidence that came through in their taunts and bearing. They understood psychology well enough to identify and exploit specific vulnerabilities. They maintained focus on physical combat while simultaneously conducting psychological assault. And they controlled their own emotional responses, preventing opponents from effectively using psychological attacks against them. Darth Sidious, widely recognized as perhaps the greatest Dunmok master in history, demonstrated the technique at grand scale. His psychological manipulation extended beyond individual duels to encompass entire civilizations and galactic events. The Clone Wars itself could be viewed as an extended application of Dunmok principles, creating conflict designed to undermine Jedi confidence, exhaust their resources, and position them for ultimate defeat. This strategic-level psychological warfare represented the technique's ultimate expression. The timing of Dunmok attacks proved crucial to effectiveness. Taunts delivered at wrong moments might be ignored as opponents focused on immediate physical threats. But psychological attacks, synchronized with physical pressure, questioning opponents' skill precisely when they struggled to defend against particularly aggressive assault, could compound stress and accelerate mental deterioration. Masters of the technique developed almost instinctive sense for optimal timing of psychological strikes. The cultural component of Dunmok deserves attention. Among Sith, proficiency in psychological warfare carried status. A Sith Lord who could defeat opponents mentally before striking physical blow demonstrated sophisticated understanding of combat's psychological dimension. This cultural valuation meant serious students of Sith combat philosophy studied Dun Mo as intensively as lightsaber forms, recognizing its importance to complete mastery. The relationship between Dun Mosh and the various lightsaber forms proved interesting. Some forms naturally complemented psychological warfare more than others. Makashi's precise control techniques created opportunities for verbal taunts during blade engagements. Form 7's chaotic aggression could be enhanced by psychological pressure that further disrupted opponent focus. The defensive forms allowed practitioners to maintain psychological assault while physically weathering opponent attacks. The evolution of Dun Mohawk across galactic history reflected changing understanding of psychology and combat. Early Sith employed relatively crude taunts and intimidation. Later generations developed more sophisticated approaches based on deeper psychological insights. By the era of the Empire, masters like Vader and Sidious had refined Dun Mok into an art as sophisticated as any lightsaber form, with its own principles, techniques, and strategic applications. The question of whether Dun Mok represented fair combat or dishonorable trickery divided opinion among Force users. Sith viewed it as legitimate and necessary. Combat was combat, and any effective technique deserved study and application. Jedi generally considered it morally questionable, viewing psychological warfare as beneath Force users' dignity. This philosophical divide meant Sith consistently possessed advantages in psychological dimensions of combat, as they trained for and expected psychological warfare, while many Jedi did not. The legacy of De Mush proved more enduring than specific lightsaber techniques. Long after particular masters fell and their unique combat styles were forgotten, the principle of integrated psychological warfare remained central to Sith combat philosophy. Future generations understood that victory required dominance across all dimensions: physical, force-based, and psychological. Dun Much represented a crucial component of this comprehensive approach to combat. As we examine the complete picture of Sith lightsaber combat, Dun Mosh reminds us that the most sophisticated warriors understood combat as more than physical exchange. The mind proved as important a battlefield as the arena where blades clashed. A Sith master, employing refined Dun Moic, could break opponents psychologically before ever landing physical blow, could undermine their confidence and focus until victory became inevitable. The Crimson Blade, backed by words calculated to wound the spirit, represented Sith, understanding that true dominance required defeating opponents completely, body, mind, and will. Conclusion: the dark legacy of the blade. We've journeyed through millennia of Sith lightsaber combat, from the foundational techniques of Form 1 through the forbidden methods that even some Sith hesitated to employ. We've examined how legendary masters transformed these forms through dark side power, creating combat styles that terrorized the galaxy and shaped its history. Now, as we reach the end of this exploration, we must consider what these techniques, these philosophies, these bloody legacies reveal about the Sith themselves and the enduring impact of their approach to combat. The evolution of Sith lightsaber combat reflects the evolution of the Sith themselves. From the earliest Dark Jedi, who brought knowledge of the forms to Korriban through the Rule of Two era, when individual mastery replaced mass warfare, to the Empire's res under Vader and Sidious. Each era demanded different approaches, yet maintained core principles: aggression, dominance, power through any effective means. These constants united Sith combat philosophy across thousands of years and countless practitioners. What becomes clear through this examination is that Sith approaches to lightsaber combat transcended mere technique. Yes, they mastered the physical movements, the footwork, the blade positioning, but they transformed these technical elements into something more: expressions of dark side philosophy made tangible through crimson blades and devastating effectiveness. A Sith employing Form 5 didn't simply counterattack. They demonstrated that meeting aggression with greater aggression led to dominance. A Sith using Dun Mosh didn't just taunt opponents. They proved that psychological superiority was power, as real as physical strength. The relationship between lightsaber combat and the broader Sith philosophy of power reveals fundamental truths about the dark side. The Sith understood that strength came in many forms: raw physical power, yes, but also precision, patience, psychological dominance, tactical flexibility. Their willingness to study and master all 7 classical forms, to develop forbidden techniques, to integrate force powers and psychological warfare, demonstrated sophisticated understanding that true power required comprehensive capability rather than narrow specialization. Yet, paradoxically, many of the greatest Sith masters achieved their status through specialization. Dooku's Makashi, Vader's hybrid Form 5, Maul's aggressive Juyo. These practitioners became legendary not by being adequate at everything, but by being exceptional at what suited their nature. The lesson here proved subtle. Comprehensive knowledge mattered, but applying that knowledge meant finding what resonated with one's essential nature and pushing it to transcendent heights. The legacy of pain in Sith training deserves final reflection. From the toxin-filled barbs on training weapons at Korriban Academy, to the brutal instruction that pushed apprentices beyond normal limits, Sith combat training embraced suffering as teaching tool. This wasn't sadism for its own sake, but calculated approach that recognized genuine combat produced fear, pain, and desperation. By incorporating these elements into training, Sith created warriors who functioned effectively under conditions that would break lesser combatants. The psychological impact of this training extended beyond technical skill. Sith who survived such brutal instruction developed absolute confidence in their capabilities. They had faced genuine danger during training, had been hurt repeatedly, had learned to channel that pain into power. When they entered actual combat, they carried psychological edge that came from knowing they had already endured worse during preparation. This confidence itself became weapon as effective as any technical skill. The Rule of Two's impact on lightsaber combat evolution proved profound. With only 2 Sith existing at any time, combat capability became literally survival critical. An apprentice who couldn't eventually defeat their master would never advance. This created intense selection pressure favoring the most capable combatants. Each generation, theoretically, produced a master slightly more skilled than the previous. This evolutionary pressure drove innovation and refinement, pushing Sith combat capability to heights previous eras couldn't match. Yet, this same system created vulnerability. With so few practitioners, Sith combat knowledge became concentrated in very few individuals. The death of a master before fully training an apprentice could mean the loss of decades or centuries of accumulated wisdom. Darth Vader's transformation, which eliminated many techniques he had mastered, represented such a loss. His injuries didn't just limit his personal capability, but potentially removed certain approaches from Sith knowledge entirely if he never passed them to apprentices before his death. The contrast between Jedi and Sith approaches to lightsaber combat illuminates their broader philosophical differences. Jedi studied forms as part of comprehensive education, one skill among many in their role as guardians and peacemakers. Sith approached combat as central expression of their philosophy. Every technique, every form, every tactical choice reflected beliefs about power, dominance, and the dark side's nature. This difference in emphasis meant Sith practitioners often achieved higher combat proficiency than individual Jedi, though Jedi's numbers and organizational structure provided advantages that individual Sith skill couldn't always overcome. The question of whether Sith combat techniques could be separated from dark side philosophy remains unresolved. Certainly, the physical movements of the forms didn't inherently require dark side connection. Jedi practiced these same techniques, but the way Sith approached these techniques, the willingness to sacrifice anything for victory, the channeling of intense emotion through blade work, the complete absence of restrictions on methods or targets, this mindset proved inseparable from dark side philosophy. A Jedi using Form 5 and a Sith using Form 5 executed similar movements, but created fundamentally different experiences for opponents. The role of individual genius in advancing Sith combat technique cannot be overlooked. Masters like Dooku, who elevated Form 2 to unprecedented heights, or Vader, who adapted Form 5 to physical limitations through creative integration of other techniques, demonstrated that exceptional individuals could advance the art beyond what systematic training produced. These innovations then potentially passed to future generations, building on previous masters' achievements to create ever more sophisticated approaches. The relationship between lightsaber combat and other Sith capabilities, force lightning, telekinesis, battle meditation, reveals how truly powerful Sith approached conflict holistically. They didn't view lightsaber technique as separate from force powers, but as components of integrated combat system. A master like Sidious could employ devastating blade work, force lightning, psychological warfare, and environmental manipulation simultaneously, creating threats from so many vectors that opponents couldn't effectively defend. This integration represented ultimate expression of Sith combat philosophy. The question of what lightsaber combat meant to the Sith, beyond its practical application, deserves consideration. For many, the blade became identity. Vader's lightsaber was as much part of his persona as his armor or breathing. Dooku's curved hilt reflected his aristocratic nature and refined approach. Maul's saber staff embodied his aggressive, overwhelming style. The weapon, the combat form, the overall approach to blade work, these became expressions of who the Sith were, not merely what they could do. This identity component had psychological implications. A Sith defined by their lightsaber mastery might struggle with situations where blade work proved inadequate or impossible. Vader's adaptation after his injuries demonstrated both the challenge and potential solutions. He had to reconstruct his identity around changed capabilities while maintaining effectiveness. This psychological dimension of combat mastery added another layer to what being a Sith warrior meant. The legacy of pain, rage, and suffering channeled through combat technique leaves troubling questions about the nature of power itself. Sith demonstrated that embracing the dark side, channeling intense negative emotions through refined technique, produced devastating effectiveness. Does this prove their philosophy about power through passion? Or does it simply show that rage and hatred, when disciplined and directed, can be effective tools while remaining fundamentally corrosive to those who employ them? The Sith would argue the former. Their eventual defeats might suggest the latter. As we close this examination of Sith lightsaber combat, several truths emerge from the blood and violence of millennia. Combat mastery represented not an end in itself, but a means to power. And power remained the ultimate Sith goal. The techniques we've explored, from the foundational movements of Shicho through the psychological warfare of Dunmok, all serve this single purpose: acquiring and maintaining dominance through any effective means. The Sith understood something about combat that many missed. Technical perfection meant nothing without will to use it. The most skilled practitioner who hesitated in the moment of killing would fall to a lesser technician who struck without doubt or mercy. This understanding made Sith combat training as much about psychological development as technical skill. They created warriors who could execute perfect technique while channeling overwhelming aggression, who maintained tactical awareness while surrendering to rage, who combined discipline with abandon in ways that seemed paradoxical but proved devastatingly effective. The seven forms, the forbidden techniques, the psychological warfare, all these elements combined to create combat philosophy that shaped galactic history. The fear of Sith blade work motivated armies, justified wars, and drove the development of weapons and tactics for millennia. Even in eras when Sith remained hidden, the memory of their martial prowess influenced how the galaxy approached conflict. Perhaps the ultimate lesson from this exploration isn't about specific techniques or famous practitioners, but about what their approach to combat reveals about power itself. The Sith believed power came through strength, through domination, through crushing opposition absolutely. Their lightsaber combat embodied this philosophy perfectly. Every form chosen for effectiveness, every technique refined to maximize lethality, every engagement approached with singular goal of complete victory. Whether this philosophy proved ultimately successful remains question for historians and philosophers. Individual Sith achieved extraordinary power through these methods. The Sith Order, despite repeated defeats, endured for millennia, specifically because of combat capabilities that made them dangerous, even when vastly outnumbered. Yet, the pattern for students of lightsaber combat, whether practitioners or scholars, the Sith legacy offers invaluable lessons about technique, tactics, and the relationship between combat philosophy and broader worldview. These lessons need not endorse Sith philosophy. To recognize their expertise in blade work was real, and their innovations shaped combat understanding fundamentally. Studying how they approached the forms, integrated force powers, and developed psychological warfare techniques provides insights applicable beyond specifically dark side applications. The Crimson Blade, symbol of Sith for millennia, carries complex legacy. It represents mastery and terror in equal measure. It embodies power achieved through whatever means necessary. It reminds us that combat, lightsaber or otherwise, ultimately reflects combatants' deepest beliefs about strength, dominance, and the proper relationship between might and right. As this journey through Sith lightsaber combat concludes, remember that what we've explored isn't merely historical curiosity. These techniques influence galactic history profoundly. These practitioners shaped countless lives through their actions. These philosophies continue to resonate through the Force itself, echoes of power and violence that remain present even when the warriors who created them have long since fallen. The dark legacy of the blade endures. In archives and holocrons, in whispered legends and terrible warnings, in the few remaining weapons and the memories of duels long past, the story of Sith lightsaber combat persists. It stands as testament to what mastery means, what can be achieved through dedication to combat excellence, and what price might ultimately be paid for power acquired through the dark side's seductive path. May the Force be with you, and may understanding of these techniques bring wisdom rather than temptation to walk the path their original practitioners followed. If you found this journey through Sith lightsaber combat enlightening, please like and subscribe to Sith Lore for more explorations of the dark side's history, philosophy, and impact on galactic civilization. Share your thoughts on these combat techniques in the comments. Which form resonates most with you? Which master's approach do you find most fascinating? Join our community of dark side scholars and help us continue exploring the aspects of Star Wars that make the Sith enduringly compelling. Until next time, may your blade be swift and your understanding deep. This is Sith Lore, bringing you the knowledge that others fear to explore.